Chapter 117. Goliath suddenly sighed. Walter, you are the first of my students to become a supreme mage, and your future achievements are likely to be above mine. I have one thing to tell you, if this person becomes your friend, and one day I am gone, you and Raphael must not neglect or despise him. Walter said in surprise, Why do you say such a thing, master? You are already a 9th-level supreme mage, and your great power gives you a vigorous life, far longer than the average person. In my mind, you are like a god. Goliath sighed again. Gilgamesh showed you that letter, and you also know my wish, which is almost impossible to realize. I just want to try my best. Even if we are long gone after thousands of years, perhaps this wish will still not be realized in the world, but after all, someone has tried. This is the meaning of my existence, do you understand? Walter's expression became solemn. Master wants to build a new city-state on the thousands of miles of fertile land, jointly governed by the surrounding countries, coexisting in harmony regardless of race or faith. I am afraid that even the gods will not support this. But I understand why you are doing this. You have foreseen the never-ending disaster of blood and fire, and even if you cannot stop it, you want to do your best. As long as Master wants it, I will fully support it. This is also my wish. Goliath said solemnly, From the moment I achieved the 9th level, I made this vow, knowing in my heart that it will not be realized, but I can dedicate my life to it. As for you and Raphael, there may be another secret waiting for you to reveal, even I do not know the answer. The young man named Allah is becoming more and more familiar to me. If he comes to Saya as a guest, you must bring him to see me. Aman did not know that Goliath had recognized him and was waiting to meet him, and after putting away the title deed, he still lived in the city-state. This time he did not find an inn, but spent a lot of money to buy a courtyard in the name of Allah, as a place to stay in Saya in the future. In the future, he might have to travel back and forth between cities, so it would be more convenient to have his own residence. After settling in, Aman wandered around Saya to familiarize himself with the place. On this day, when he was near the south gate, he saw many people gathering on the main road leading to the city gate. They all had excited expressions on their faces, as if they were waiting for something. After asking around, it turned out that High Priest Raphael had returned from his trip. Raphael did not alarm anyone when he left, but when he came back, it was very grand. The Cape States even sent envoys and guards to escort him, giving the High Priest the highest level of courtesy. Aman was looking for Raphael, so he stood in the crowd to watch the show. The guards at the gate lined up neatly to welcome them. Raphael's carriage was the first to enter the city, followed by soldiers from Cape States in bright armor. In order to show courtesy, other than knives and axes, all other weapons were put away. Raphael's eyesight was very good. He sat in the carriage with the hood up and waved at the welcoming people with a smile. When he turned his head, he happened to meet Aman's eyes. He immediately revealed a look of surprise and nodded at him, then quietly gave a few instructions to an attendant next to the carriage. At this moment, Aman had a very uncomfortable feeling. It was a feeling of resentment and fear, coming from a carriage behind. That carriage was the carriage of the envoy from Cape States. The curtains were down, so he could not see who was sitting inside, but Aman was sure that there was someone in the carriage staring at him from the corner of the curtains, full of hostility. Aman wanted to avoid and quickly disappear from the crowd. However, Raphael's attendant had already left the convoy and walked over. He parted the crowd and greeted him, Lord Allah, hello. Lord Raphael sent me to pay his respects to you. The crowd automatically parted to make an empty space for Aman. Everyone looked at him with respect. Aman had no choice but to return the greeting. Lord Raphael really has good eyesight to be able to recognize me at a glance among so many people. What advice did he send you? The attendant bowed and said, Lord Raphael is very happy that you can come to Saya. I wonder if you have met High Priest Walter. Aman shook his head gently. I have just arrived in the city and have not had the time to visit. The attendant added, In that case, Lord Raphael asked me to leave his address and welcome you as a guest. He also asked where you live in Saya. He wants to visit you personally. If you don't have a place to stay, let me arrange it for you. As they spoke, the convoy had gone far away. Raphael saw Aman as soon as he entered the city. He was going to the official office with the envoy from the Cape States, so it was inconvenient for him to stop. He specially sent an attendant to greet him to Aman. Aman thought for a while and left his address in Saya. There was nothing to keep secret. The hostile eyes in the second carriage attracted Aman's attention, but he was now a supreme mage and a supreme warrior. He was also alone, so he was not afraid of anything. Even if there was trouble that he could not deal with, he could always get away in this densely populated city. Moreover, he originally wanted to see Goliath, so Raphael took the initiative to look for him. When the convoy went far away, Fayal Judah quietly put down a corner of the curtain and fell into contemplation with a gloomy face. He was the envoy who paid a return visit to the Cape States this time, and he had two tasks here. His official duties were to lead the guards to escort Raphael back to his country, to convey the greetings of the Cape States, to discuss the trade after the traffic was restored, and to secretly observe the situation in Saya. In addition, he had a private task, which was secretly given to him by Supreme Mage Julian. If there were two people in the Cape States who hated Aman the most, it would be Julian and Judas. The reason why Judas hated Aman was very simple. He had embezzled the money that Rod Dick rewarded to Aman, and his actions in Duk also indirectly framed Aman. Judas originally thought that Aman was just an insignificant minor, but he did not expect that Aman would later become an important figure. A small figure who had been offended and framed by him suddenly became so important that he could not sleep. He wished that Aman would be unlucky again, otherwise, one day in the future, it was likely that he would be the one who would be unlucky. This was the mentality of many people, even though Aman had never offended Judas. As for Julian's hatred for Aman, it was so deep that the men he sent to kill Aman had disappeared without a trace. The adoratress sent someone to bring back the secret letter he had sent to the high priest Burke, and then released him to Saya, making Julian suffer in silence. As long as Aman was still alive in the world, he was like a thorn in his side, but there was nothing he could do. Julian was, after all, an 8th-level supreme mage and one of the founders of the Academy of Igut. Although he was nominally under the jurisdiction of Rod Dick, his actual status was not lower than that of Rod Dick. In the Empire of Igut, he was also well-informed and very powerful. He could not openly offend the adoratress, but it did not mean that he could not offend Aman. When Aman was in the temple of Isis, Julian could not do anything to him, and now the opportunity had finally come. Aman was sent to Saya to carry out a secret investigation mission, which Julian had heard through his own channels. If a spy like him was caught, his identity would not be recognized in public. He would either be interrogated and executed, or exchanged in private. In short, once Aman was exposed, not only would he fail the mission, but he would also most likely lose his life. It was Julian who had specially arranged for Fayal Judah to be sent as a return visit this time. Sitting in the carriage, Judas remembered what Lord Julian had secretly told him. When you go to Hittite, in addition to carrying out the official duties assigned to you by the city, you have to pay attention to another matter. I heard that Aman was sent to Saya by the Temple of Isis to carry out a secret investigation mission. If you can find out his whereabouts, I think you know what to do. Fayal asked with some apprehension. If Aman's identity is exposed and he is caught, will it affect the affairs of the empire and the city? Julian smiled. He is going to spy on the situation after the flood. As far as I know, the empire has sent more than one spy. Aman doesn't know anything about the real military and political secrets. Even if he is caught, the Empire of Igut and the Temple of Isis will not admit it. There will be no future trouble. Judas, this is a secret between you and me. If you succeed, it shows that you are a very capable man. I don't think you want to be a clerk forever, do you? Judas asked again, why did the Temple of Isis send Aman to carry out a secret investigation mission? Arya sneered, it's nothing more than giving him a chance to be promoted again. The Isis shrine is facing a change of power. Someone is trying to cultivate his trusted followers, and I'm one of the people who are being pushed out of power. But don't forget, even if I am not the high priest of the Temple of Isis, I am still an elder of the Academy of Magic of Igut. The Academy of Magic of Igut has made a clear prophecy about the changes that will happen to Saya, and they have already received the guidance of the oracle. Amon's mission is not important. On the way here, Judas was in a dilemma. He knew that Lady Julian wanted to use Hittite to get rid of Amon, which was in line with his intention. But he still felt a little uneasy. Besides, Saya was so big, and the hope of meeting Amon was very slim. But as soon as he entered the city, he saw Amon. What a coincidence! Was there really a god guiding him? Judas gritted his teeth and made a decision. He would let Amon disappear here forever. When he returned, Lady Julian would definitely appreciate him and put him in an important position. And there would be no more trouble like Amon. Goliath did not receive the emissary from Cape States. Governor Xiao Mo held a grand welcome dinner in his mansion, and asked the financial officer to accompany Mr. Judas to have fun in the city for the next few days. At the same time, Governor Shmuel secretly issued an order. The entire city was still in a leisurely, comfortable, and peaceful atmosphere, but he secretly tightened the security checks to prevent spies from spying on important information. In the minds of officials like Governor Xiao Mo, they already knew that the conflict between Hittite and Igut was approaching, but it was not the time for a complete showdown. The more it was like this, the more they had to do on the surface, and the more hospitable they were to the emissary from Igut. Just that night, Captain Reese Myun, who was in charge of patrolling the city, received a secret report. A secret agent from the Empire of Igut had quietly sneaked into the city to spy on the military after investigating the strategic terrain of the charcoal forest, but was coincidentally recognized. The report also included the address of the secret agent. This person was called Allaha, and he had bought a house in the city a few days ago as a stronghold for secret activities. Before the declaration of war between the two countries, this kind of spy infiltration was very common, and the Hittite kingdom had also sent many secret agents to the Empire of Igut in the name of business or other things to carry out tasks. Both sides did not use weapons on the surface, but were secretly very guarded. Myun did not know whether the secret report was true or not, but he did not dare to neglect it. He immediately rushed to the house with a team of guards, and quietly blocked both ends of the intersection in the night. The heavily armed soldiers surrounded the house to prevent leakage and to prevent the secret agent from taking advantage of the chaos to escape. Only then did he come to the door with a few elite men, ready to personally arrest Allaha. Myun was the captain of Saya's personal guards, and he was in charge of 3 personal guards. Usually, the 3 captains took turns to patrol the city, but today the governor had ordered Myun to personally go into battle to show his importance, and he just happened to be in time for this matter. It was really good luck. Myun's origin was also a bit special. 2 years ago, he was just a small leader of a courier station in the charcoal forest, and he was only in charge of a dozen soldiers stationed at the station. In that great flood, all the courier stations in Duk and the charcoal forest were washed away. Only Myun was calm in the face of danger, and he quickly led the soldiers to evacuate to the highest boulder nearby, tied everyone together with a belt, and held on to the bushes to wait for rescue. The supreme mage Goliath drove the blue boat deep into the flood to Duk, and on the way, he rescued them. The group of soldiers were the only survivors of the flood. Whether it was when they were in trouble or when they were rescued, Muen had always been in command. Regardless of whether they were frightened or surprised, the soldiers under him had always maintained discipline under his orders. They did not show any signs of panic. They did not disturb Gaulier on the Blue Ark either, and were praised and appreciated by Gaulier. After returning to the city, Goliath specially recommended Myun to Xiao Mo, and he was put in an important position from then on. When Xiao Mo led his men to ambush Roddik's convoy, he lost a squad of guards, and of course, they needed to be rebuilt. So Myun became a squad leader, and later was called a division leader. Just a few months ago, Myun broke through the 7th level and became a supreme warrior, and was promoted to the captain of the entire Saya's guard, responsible for the safety of the governor and maintaining the order of the city. As a supreme warrior, Myun had the status of a noble, and he also served as the captain of the city's guard. His status was far more prominent than that of the courier station's small leader. He was deeply grateful to Goliath, the supreme mage who saved him and recommended him. Not only did he save his life, but he also recognized him. Because of this, Myun was dedicated to his duty, and as a supreme warrior, he would personally come to catch a small secret agent. The envoy of the Cape States, Judas, was still here as a guest, so everything had to be done in secret. The night was very quiet, and the location of Allah's house was also very secluded. The streets had long been emptied and martial law had been enforced. Myun inspected the house with satisfaction, then he came to the door, pulled out his weapon, and kicked the door open. Under the feet of a supreme warrior, the thick wooden door was as fragile as a piece of paper, and it broke and scattered without even making much noise. Myun, with a shield in his left hand and a sword in his right, took the lead and walked in first. The front yard was empty, and the windows of the hall were lit. The people inside should not have rested yet. Myun did not talk nonsense. He took his weapon and stepped towards the door under the escort of his guards, then raised his foot and kicked the door away. This kick was very heavy. The door did not break, but the door shaft broke and directly slammed into the house. If someone hid behind the door and peeped, they would fall into the house together with the door. Myun's shield and sword flashed, and the guards on both sides with round shields and spears reached into the door from the left and right to block the flank. The cooperation was quite skillful. According to common sense, after the heavy door fell to the ground, Captain Myun should have shouted his name, explained the purpose of the visit, and let the secret agent take the initiative to surrender. When a small secret agent saw such a scene, and a supreme warrior like Myun personally led people to arrest him, it would be strange if he was not scared out of his wits. But something that left everyone dumbfounded happened. Myun had just kicked the door open when he saw the scene inside. He immediately dropped his weapon and knelt down with a thud. The guards on both sides also put down their weapons and knelt outside the door. The armor on their bodies made a crisp sound. The three of them said in unison, "We deserve to die, for disturbing you in the middle of the night." The soldiers behind all showed a look of horror. Without saying a word, they put down their weapons and knelt in the courtyard. There were indeed people in the house, not one but four. An old man and a young man sat face to face, not even lifting their eyelids, as if they did not hear any sound. There were also two people sitting side by side at the table, facing the door. They saw Myun kicking the door in, made a gesture to stop, and showed a stern look. It was the two high priests of Saya, Walter and Raphael. The door that was kicked away turned into countless pieces in mid-air, floating all over the ground, but not even a piece fell on the table or the four people. The young man was, of course, the secret agent that Myun wanted to catch tonight, Allah, and the old man opposite Allah was actually Goliath. The two were playing chess. What they were playing was an ancient game called beast fighting chess. This game used various beast-shaped chess pieces to replace different soldiers. They were arranged into formations on a large chessboard to restrain and kill each other. It was very complicated to calculate, and only a few people could understand it. The rules of these two people were even more peculiar. There was no chessboard or chess pieces at all. Instead, the light and shadow of the military beast chess appeared in the void on the table. The chessboard changed into a battle between beasts, and it was a demonstration of the chess game. Chapter 118. The minds of the two players seemed to be completely immersed in the game of chess. They paid no attention to the movements of the outside world and continued to play chess with full concentration. Walter and Raphael watched the game without saying a word. If the game was a battlefield, then they were the people watching from the sidelines. Goliath sat motionless, and Myun did not dare to speak. The whole courtyard fell into a strange silence. They had come aggressively, but the scene had become so absurd that they did not know whether to laugh or cry. Myun could not help but curse in his heart. Who was the one who told him the secret? Why didn't he find out and let him kick open the door of the room where Lord Goliath was playing chess? This was simply too rude. Was someone deliberately framing him? Who was the young man who was playing chess with Lord Goliath? Was he a supreme mage from the capital? Myun wished he could catch the informant and beat him half to death, but he could only kneel at the door without saying a word and wait for Goliath to finish the game, looking extremely embarrassed. Fortunately, the waiting time was not too long. After about the time of a meal, Amon suddenly looked up and smiled. Lord Goliath, I admit defeat. Your magic and chess skills are far above mine. Today's game has been an eye-opener for me and I have learned a lot. With the voice, the light and shadow of the game on the table disappeared. Goliath twirled his beard and laughed. Thank you, young man. I haven't played such a good game for a long time. Your chess skills are very good. It seems that you must have also studied military formations, but you lack actual command experience. As for magic, with your achievements, it is already quite long and lasting, obviously surpassing mages of the same level. It is really amazing. If it were someone else who could change the game for such a long time, they would at least have to take out a staff. You did not show any signs of losing. If we want to decide the winner of this game, we have to play until dawn. You don't want the people in the courtyard to kneel all night, do you? Ha, I don't want that either. After saying this, the 9th level Supreme Mage turned his head and smiled at Myun. Our Supreme Warrior, you came here late at night, and your way of greeting is quite unique. I'm playing chess with a friend who came from afar. I'm sorry I didn't greet you earlier. Did I disturb your work? If you have something to say, you can continue. I won't disturb you. Myun's forehead was already sweating, but he wisely didn't try to defend himself. Instead, he shook his head and said, I received orders to arrest a person, but the information I received was wrong and I barged into the wrong door. Please forgive me, Lord Goliath. Goliath waved his hand. The night is cold. You're still wearing your armor. Don't kneel. Stand up and talk. Please take a good look. Is the person you want to arrest here? Myun stood up and shook his head firmly. I've checked. There's no one I want to catch. Goliath's smile was very friendly. Guard Captain Myun, are you sure? Myun nodded with certainty. Of course I'm sure. Goliath had just said clearly that he was playing chess with a friend who came from afar. How could he catch this person? Not to mention whether this person was a spy of the Empire of Igut. Even if he was, there was probably more to it than meets the eye. What's more, that person was a supreme mage. Myun and his men would not be able to catch him. How to deal with this person was already Lord Goliath's business. Myun didn't even want to ask any more questions. Just then, there was another movement outside the door. Governor Xiao Mo came in with a few guards and was also surprised to see the scene. He hurriedly crossed the threshold and came into the house. He saluted Goliath and said, Dear Supreme Mage, why are you here? The guards on patrol were too reckless. I'm sorry to disturb your evening chat. Just now, a guard had reported that Guard Captain Myun had brought people to arrest a spy. A large number of soldiers surrounded a courtyard and kicked open 2 doors in succession, only to find Lord Goliath and 2 high priests fighting with someone inside. Governor Xiao Mo had already fallen asleep. When he heard the news, he hurriedly put on his clothes and rushed to see the situation. Goliath smiled and pointed to Amon. This is Mr. Allaha, a disciple of an old friend of mine. I am very pleased that he has achieved the 7th level at such a young age. He once rescued Walter and Raphael who were in danger in the desert and happened to pass by Saya a few days ago. I was in a good mood tonight, so I played a game of chess, but I didn't expect the Supreme Warrior Myun to come and greet me. Xiao Mo hurriedly explained, It's a misunderstanding, it's all a misunderstanding. Mr. Allaha is a supreme mage from afar and your friend. He also saved 2 high priests in the desert, so he deserves a grand reception. I won't disturb you any longer tonight. I will hold a banquet at the governor's mansion another day to thank him. Amon also got up and returned the salute to Governor Xiao Mo. Goliath smiled and shook his head. There's no need to hold a banquet at the governor's mansion. He just came to talk to me. This is a private meeting, there's no need to disturb others. Mr. Allah will return to Igut tomorrow. Since it's a misunderstanding, Governor, go back to sleep. I'm sorry to disturb you. Governor Xiao Imo tactfully went back to sleep. He had been in charge of Saya for many years, so how could he not know? There were no carriages or horses on the street or in the courtyard outside the door. Goliath and his 2 disciples obviously came on foot, not wanting to disturb anyone. This was a private meeting. It was unknown where Muen had gotten the news from, but he had come to capture the spy and had surrounded the entire courtyard. With Goliath's ability, how could he not notice the movement outside? There were 3 supreme mages sitting in the room. As long as Goliath sent Walter or Raphael out to greet them, he could let Muen take his people away, but the old man did not do so. It was said that the old man was playing chess with the young man, and the game was very serious, as if he was waiting for Muen to kick down the door. Goliath clearly wanted Muen to see him on purpose, tactfully saying that the old man already knew about the matter and would deal with it, and that the others should not meddle or talk too much. If the Supreme Mage was really a spy of the Empire of Igut, they could not act rashly in this city. Goliath and the 2 high priests were present, and the others could not interfere, let alone intervene. If the Supreme Mage was not a spy of the Empire of Igut, the consequences of this misunderstanding would be very serious, so it was better to pretend not to know. Xiao Mo apologized and left with Muen. These people were really efficient. No one knew where they found just the right door planks, but in a short time, they gently repaired the door and the courtyard door, closed the door, and retreated. Xiao Mo ordered Muen and his bodyguards not to speak carelessly, and Muen ordered the guards to retreat to the intersection of the streets around the courtyard, not allowing others to disturb them. Silence returned to the darkness. Not long after, the door opened, and Walter and Raphael came out, then gently closed the door and stood guard in the courtyard. Only Goliath and Amon were left in the room. When they were alone, Goliath did not hide anything and asked directly, Amon, counting the time, we haven't seen each other for nearly 3 years. I saw you once outside Mr. Nietzsche's house, I really didn't expect to see you here today. You've grown up, and you're already a Supreme Mage. This Supreme Mage's eyes were so sharp that he could still recognize Amon today, even though it was only a glimpse at night. Amon bowed and said, Yes, I am Amon, the miner from Duk. I know that you are a friend of Master Nietzsche, and that you helped me in the past. It is not until today that I have the opportunity to express my gratitude to you. Goliath sat there, looking at Ammonius with a look full of emotion. A good teacher produces a good student. Only Nietzsche can teach such an excellent student like you, but you are not like him. Amon, since you have returned to Saya, and I have recognized you, as the chief priest, I have to ask you a few questions. Amon replied respectfully, Please ask. Goliath thought for a moment and then said, I have heard about what happened to you in Igut. You returned Nero's relics in Cape States, later became an honorary warrior of the Temple of Isis, and made a meritorious deed at the blessing ceremony. These are all your own experiences, but you left Duk to carry out the decree of the Empire of Hittite, so the first thing I want to ask you is, have you completed your mission? It seemed that the 2 countries really did a lot of infiltration work between each other. Goliath even heard about Amon's deeds. Amon smiled bitterly. Your Excellency, my mission has been completed. According to the official announcement of the Empire of Igut, the evil Archmage Bear was destroyed 34 years ago, and Troni, the adoratress of the Temple of Isis, made a holy sacrifice for him. Perhaps it was an oversight, but this announcement was not sent to the Hittite kingdom. Goliath nodded. In that case, your mission has been completed, and the town of Duk is no longer there. The Hittite kingdom should not pursue the case of the miner named Amon. Let me ask you again, are you a secret agent of the Empire of Igut? Amon did not deny anything. He told the truth, I don't know what you mean by secret agent. I did accept the mission from the Temple of Isis to investigate the terrain of the desert and swamp after the flood. The reason why the adoratress sent me to carry out this mission is that I have long told her that I want to go back to my hometown. Goliath smiled. The desert, lakes, swamps and grasslands are there. Anyone who wants to see it can see it. As for what it will become in the future, I think the leaders of all the kingdoms already know, so it doesn't matter whether you see it or not. But this time you came to Saya, is it to spy on the military intelligence? Aman shook his head. No, I only came here for two purposes. The first is to see the manor left by Mayor Dusty. It should have belonged to Moses, but it was occupied by a group of scoundrels. So I bought this manor to settle down. The second is to see you, Lord Goliath. Mr. Nietzsche once told me that if there is a chance, I must see you. You may have something to tell me. Goliath was startled. He changed the topic and continued to ask, since you are not here to spy on the military intelligence, someone told me that you are a secret agent sent by the Empire of Igut, trying to harm the Hittite kingdom and Saya. What do you think? Aman replied frankly, I was forced to leave my hometown. After many twists and turns, it was the temple of Isis who took me in. The Hittite kingdom is subservient to the Empire of Igut, at least for now. I only asked to go back to my hometown to see what it has become. The temple of Isis asked me to report what I saw. If you think this is a violation of the laws of the Hittite kingdom, feel free to deal with it according to the law. Goliath thought for a moment and smiled bitterly. Most of the conspiracies in the world are afraid to be exposed. Since you said so, it really is not a violation of any laws, at least until the Hittite kingdom and the Empire of Igut publicly break off. Aman, do you know why I let those people break in and see you with me? Aman did not answer and asked in return, please enlighten me. Goliath, after playing that game with you, I know very well that they can't catch you at all. Once they make a move, it will only cause casualties to the innocent people around. An outstanding 7th level mage like you won't give up so easily. Aman said very modestly, but in front of you, I have no chance to escape at all. It is very easy for you to take me down. Goliath suddenly blinked and said, is that so? Even the Scorpion King does not dare to attack you easily. You must have something to rely on. It is said that Nero made a Tiamat's wrath in his later years, and you are the one who obtained his relics, right? Let's not talk about the legend. You did not violate the laws of the Hittite kingdom and completed the task of that year. I just came to see the younger generation of an old friend and played a game of chess with you. Aman did not say anything more. He knelt there and bowed again. Thank you. Goliath sighed and shook his head gently. You don't have to thank me. In fact, I did not really help you, whether at the beginning or now. If there is a possibility that we will meet on the battlefield in the future, I will not be polite or merciful. Aman, you have given me enough help, why do you say that? Goliath, because we are in different positions, I know more and more things than you know, that's all. Let's not talk too much about official business. There is one thing I want to thank you for, you rescued my 2 students in the desert. But I have a question in my heart, and I ask you to answer it. As he spoke, the Supreme Mage waved his hand, and another ball of light appeared in the room. It was the scene of Aman and the Scorpion King swearing an oath to each other. The two said respectively, if I violate the oath, I will never become a true god, and, if I violate the oath, I will always be a lowly human in your eyes. He waved his hand again, and the light disappeared. Goliath showed a thoughtful look and asked, the oath between you and the Scorpion King is very profound, what kind of secret does it contain? The Supreme Mage spoke too directly. Aman did not want to lie but did not know how to answer. While he was hesitating, he heard Goliath say again, you don't have to answer in a hurry. Before making such a request, I also want to show you another secret. I have buried this secret in my heart for a long time, not even to my closest relatives. Finally, I have waited for you. Goliath stretched out his left hand and shook it gently, and a staff appeared out of thin air. He wore a ring on the middle finger of his left hand. It seemed to be a spatial artifact similar to the one left by Nero, and the staff was hidden in it. With the appearance of the staff, the tables and chairs in the room and the four walls seemed to become transparent and gradually disappeared, and Aman felt that he had come to another world. Information magic could show traces of light and shadow, which was not unusual for Aman, but Goliath's brilliant magic directly brought Aman into a scene from a long time ago, as if he was there. The flood was a turbid ocean. The sky was covered in dark clouds that were as dark as ink, and it was raining cats and dogs. Flashes of lightning streaked across the dark sky, bringing with them a deafening sound that made people not know where they were. A ball of lightning fell, stirring up a spiral of bright marks in the water. At this moment, a voice shouted angrily, "God, you have finally appeared in the world, I have waited for too long." A figure separated the waves and flew straight into the sky. It was crazy old Nietzsche, his messy hair and beard fluttering in the air, the staff in his hand emitting thousands of golden ribbons of light. His eyes were wide open, looking for the god behind the dark clouds and lightning, cursing loudly and waving his staff as if to poke a hole in the sky, exuding suffocating madness. The god in the clouds finally appeared. Nietzsche threw his staff in the air, and it burst into a ball of golden light like the most dazzling sun. He launched the strongest attack of his life, and laughed wildly, telling the god not to dodge or be afraid. Then countless thick lightning gathered from all directions, and heaven and earth shook. Nietzsche also turned into a ball of dazzling light and immediately disappeared. This part of the scene disappeared, but Goliath's magic was not over yet. In a flash, he was in a tall and majestic shrine. Goliath was kneeling in front of the statue of Enlil, praying, when he suddenly heard the voice of the god. It was the flood that destroyed Duk. The heavy rain brought the flood, the warm and humid wind from the sea mixed with the air currents of the Saya plateau, causing the heavy rain. It was my divine power that made the air currents of the plateau spiral, it was my anger that guided the lightning in the clouds. Aman also heard the cry of Goliath in his soul, but what about Duk? No one survived the flood. Enlil replied, "The flood is my blessing to Saya. I will hear the cheers of the people, and my shrine will be flooded with grateful believers. You will understand all this soon. As for Duk, do you want to ask me why I did not save them from the flood? Why should I save them?" Then a piece of information was imprinted in Aman's mind. It was the various things that happened in his hometown after he left Duk. Many children died, a series of tragedies, people prayed to Murin, but at the same time, they violated the oracle of the patron. Then he heard Enlil's voice again, "Priest, do you see? They have betrayed the oracle of the patron, and there is no reason for Murin to stay there, so I will bless the land again. The flood is my blessing, but people can't just ask to enjoy the blessings of the gods. I don't need to save the sinful people from the flood." Chapter 119. Goliath reached out and pulled Aman up. "Boy, you can stand up now. I don't know if your shoulders and knees can bear all this. But I believe you are stronger than I thought. Mr. Nietzsche chose such an ending and deliberately let me see it. He must be trying to tell me something." Aman stood up. He still felt very heavy physically and mentally, just like the helpless child many years ago. He continued to cry on Goliath's shoulder. Goliath just patted his back gently and did not speak. After an unknown period of time, Aman stopped crying and found that his tears had wet Goliath's shoulder. He wiped his tears and said, "Mr. Goliath, I can't describe the gratitude in my heart. Today, someone finally told me all this. That god, the god named Enlil, I just recognized him. I met him in the town of Som in the kingdom of Babylon. He was a shepherd at that time. And just a few days ago, I said goodbye to that god. From now on, he is just Enlil. I will not forgive him, even if I may become a god one day." Goliath was surprised. "Boy, how can you say such a thing? Is this the secret of the oath you made with the Scorpion King?" Aman nodded. "When you asked me just now, I didn't know how to answer. Now I understand why Mr. Nietzsche asked me to come to you. He wanted you to tell me all this, and he also wanted me to tell you what he has been pursuing all his life. You and I are the people he has pinned his hopes on. Mr. Goliath, please sit down. Let me tell you about Mr. Nietzsche's thinking and the answer I have verified. The two sat down at the table again. What happened in the room, from beginning to end, could not be detected by the people outside. Walter and Raphael waited patiently in the courtyard until the sky began to brighten. When there was a glimmer of light outside the window, Amon finally finished what he wanted to say. He also talked about his experiences over the past few years. Goliath let out a long sigh and said, "Child, this is a secret that everyone in the world yearns for even in their dreams, and you told me just like that." There were still traces of tears on Amon's face. "I can't say that this is my repayment to you or my revenge against the gods. Even if it's only because of Master Nietzsche's wish, I should still tell you. There were some people I wouldn't tell no matter what, but there were even more people that it would be useless to tell them. You are already a supreme mage of the 9th level, so it is easy for you to understand everything I say." Goliath's expression was very complicated. He closed his eyes and said after a while, "I have experienced too much in my life. I'm afraid it will be very difficult for me to confirm this path from the beginning. In fact, with Master Nietzsche's talent, he should have achieved higher achievements than me, but he spent his life searching for this path and left it for you to confirm. My hope is very slim, but among my students, Walter and Raphael should have a chance." Amon asked, "You already know this secret. Do you want to teach Walter and Raphael the power of 2 sides?" What Amon said to Goliath was completely different from what he taught his students. Medanzo, Link, and others only knew that this was a unique way of practicing power. Amon never said that the power of 2 sides was the path to becoming a god. But in front of Goliath, he explained everything clearly, and a supreme mage of the 9th level could naturally understand the profound meaning of it. Goliath shook his head and said, "I will not teach this power to the 2 high priests as the chief priest of the shrine of Enril. Besides, all this is the path you have confirmed. Even if my achievements are higher than yours, I am afraid I can't teach it to my students like you, because I have not confirmed it myself. Amon, I have a personal request. Can I ask you something?" Amon nodded and said, "Don't say anything, please say it." Goliath thought for a moment and said, "If there is a chance in the future, please lead them on this path. I know it can't be forced, it all depends on each person's fate. What you practice is not only the power of 2 sides, but also a belief different from that of the shrines in the world. If one day, they encounter difficulties in life and need guidance, please don't forget my request at this time." Amon thought carefully for a moment and finally nodded and said, "Master Goliath, I will remember, I will not forget." Goliath stood up and said, "In fact, I have another conjecture. Whether it is body arts or magic arts, it is possible to become a god when practiced to the extreme, but I am afraid this is more difficult, and the test you will face is unknown. Let people like me and Enkidu verify it, and the power of 2 sides that you practice should be the secret of the gods." Amon was a little puzzled. "You and Enkidu?" Goliath replied, "I am a supreme mage of the 9th level, and you have just understood what I have experienced. You are not clear about Enkidu's situation. He is a pure warrior who has never experienced the second awakening of power. It is not that he cannot, but that he is unwilling. He wants to practice body arts to an unprecedented peak, to prove that mortals can also be as powerful as the gods, or at that time, he will be a powerful god." Amon let out a long breath. "I see, this warrior's ambition is really not small." Before leaving, Goliath said again, "You want to guide the descendants of Duk back to their hometown, and you have led the caveman tribe to build a home in the swamp. In the near future, the fertile land will inevitably cause disputes between countries, and the home that should flow with milk and honey will be a land of blood and fire for thousands of years. I have a wish. I hope to build a new city-state there, coexistence regardless of race, regardless of religion. I wonder what you think." Amon said solemnly, "This is even more difficult than a mortal becoming a god, but I admire your wish. If this wish can really be realized, I also hope that the descendants of Duk will live in such a city-state." Goliath sighed. "Although the hope is slim, at least someone has tried. This is what I am thinking. It can be foreseen that there will also be disputes between the gods, and people will drive their own desires in the name of the gods. Aman, do you know who betrayed you this time? Why did the guards break in when I was visiting? Aman thought for a moment and asked, who is the messenger sent by the Cape States this time? I met a convoy at the south gate and sensed a hostile gaze. Goliath, you mean Faal Judah? Then please wait a day, before you leave Saya, I will give you something. After saying this, he was about to go out when he heard something fall on the table with a thud, startling the 9th-level Supreme Mage. Looking back, it was a cat falling from the roof beam. It was Schrödinger. Today, when Goliath came to visit, Schrödinger did not want to show up and ran to the roof beam to hide. None of the 3 guests found it. Just now, when Goliath used magic and chatted with Aman for a long time, the cat watched and listened very carefully, its eyes wide open and its ears pricked up. Its head stretched farther and farther from the roof beam. It seemed to be a little distracted and accidentally fell. The cat's body was flexible, and it turned in the air and landed lightly on the table. Of course, it was unharmed, but Goliath was startled. The Supreme Mage looked at Schrödinger with a strange expression. Aman, is this your cat? Aman nodded. Yes, this cat is my friend. It was originally Mr. Nietzsche's cat and has been with me since. Its temper is a bit special, it doesn't like to deal with strangers, but it likes to watch. Goliath patted Aman on the shoulder and said hesitantly, oh, I have some impressions. It wasn't like this at the beginning. Young man, to be able to raise a cat like this, its future is limitless. Take care. The next afternoon, Goliath called Governor Xiao Mo to the shrine and asked him, Governor, what is the origin of the informant, who is the mastermind behind it, have you found out? Xiao Mo replied, this morning you sent Walter to assist Myun in the investigation, and specifically reminded him to start with Faal Judah, and it has been found out. It was Judas who sent someone to bribe the vagrants in the city to inform the guards. The person who told Judas Mr. Allah's address was the attendant who welcomed High Priest Raphael back to the city. When Judas entered the city, he saw Aman in the crowd. At that time, Raphael sent an attendant to leave the convoy to greet Aman, and Judas then sent one of his men to get information from the attendant, asking him what had happened. The attendant was unsuspecting and casually replied that Lord Raphael had seen an old friend he had met in the desert when he entered the city, and had sent him to ask for the address. In this way, Judas easily found out where Aman was staying in Saya, and then sent someone to inform. Goliath ordered, find an opportunity to arrest Judas' man, interrogate him in secret, and get a confession and conclusive evidence, then give it to me. Xiao Mo asked puzzledly, Honorable Supreme Mage, do you want to report Judas to the Empire of Igut? Isn't it a good thing for us to have such a person in the enemy's camp? Goliath sneered, it's not my business whether to report him or not, do you think a little clerk like him can really fight a Supreme Mage like Allah? He dared to frame someone without even knowing who his opponent was, such a person is incompetent, and his conduct is despicable. Get the evidence and give it to me, don't ask anything else. A day later, Aman left Saya without alerting anyone. Raphael personally sent him back to the edge of the charcoal marsh and handed him something. This is a gift from Master Goliath, you can decide what to do with it. After bidding farewell to Raphael and entering the marsh, Aman opened the thing in a deserted place. It was an artifact that recorded information about magic. This artifact was different from the Taraculus, it was only a one-time use, and after recording information, it had no other use. After the information was erased, the artifact would be destroyed. The information inside was the process of interrogating Judas' man and the whole process of Judas framing Aman. Aman's face darkened after reading it, and he suddenly remembered the warrior Maki who had tried to murder him in Duk a long time ago, and the words that Crazy Ol had said, when anyone makes a choice, it is tantamount to choosing the corresponding consequences, whether they are willing or not. If you choose to forgive and forgive, you must understand and be able to bear the consequences of this forgiveness. He put away the artifact, crossed the charcoal marsh, and returned to the place where Link and the others were standing. Link and Madanzo were looking forward to Aman, and the tribesmen were cheering enthusiastically. The cavemen were also very efficient. Amon had not left for long, but they had already built a rough but strong wall around the temporary settlement, which could prevent the attacks of ordinary beasts. Relying on the wall, they could also carry out defensive operations. According to Amon's vision, in the future, this place would be built into a magnificent city, but that was only a long-term goal. Things had to be done step by step, and things had to be done step by step. As the flood slowly receded, the construction work could be carried out step by step. Amon led Link, Madanzo, and dozens of tribal leaders to build a simple altar and pray to Murin. Amon wanted to participate in the prayer ceremony in person, but Link and Madanzo pulled him aside and advised, "Ammonius, you and Murin are on the same side. Everyone saw you hugging the goddess in your dreams. Even if you don't stand on the altar to receive the sacrifice, don't kneel down and pray with us." Amon could only smile bitterly and let them be. After the ceremony, according to Murin's instructions in the dream, Amon led the people to the original ruins of the shrine and dug down. First, they cleared more than 10 feet of silt, and then they dug to the original soil layer of Duk. The shrine had long been destroyed, and there was not even much gravel left of the foundation. They continued to dig down another 20 feet, and even when they had reached the hard rock layer, they still found nothing. If it were not for the clear guidance of the oracle, no one would continue to dig. At this time, Amon sensed a faint fluctuation of power, so he ordered the cavemen to dig down another 10 feet. After clearing away the gravel and floating soil, a huge rock that had fused with the underground rock layer was exposed. He ordered everyone to retreat to the ground. Holding the staff in his hand, he murmured an incantation and floated in the air. Inexplicably, a shining pattern appeared on the surface of the rock. It was the trace of a magic formation. While Amon was pondering, a sudden rumble came from the bottom. The huge rock split into 6 pieces, revealing a hole in the middle. Inside the hole, various parangons of different colors shone brightly. This treasure was not opened by him, but by Yun Namna. She was waiting for him to come. Unfortunately, the shrine had long been destroyed. How did the chief priests of the past put the wealth of the sacrifice in here? In the flood, Enril took away the remaining parangons of Duk and turned them into glittering droplets that shot into the sky. Goliath saw it with his own eyes. But the most hidden treasure in the shrine of Murin was not only protected by the magic formation of the goddess herself, but also protected by the power of the earth. The things inside were not taken away by Enril. Now they were all left to Amon. The cavemen who were watching around the huge pit did not know what was going on. They saw with their own eyes that Amon stood in the void like a god and took out his staff. Suddenly, a shining pattern appeared on the huge rock, and then it split into 6 neat pieces. Inside, there were so many parangons of different colors. This was a miracle. Everyone kneeled on the ground and cheered. Amon was also surprised. All the parangons in the treasure were special parangons. They were the private collections of the chief priests of Duk. There were hundreds of them in total. The first thing that came to Amon's mind was not how much money he could exchange them for. The main materials for making all kinds of precious artifacts almost all needed special parangons. If he wanted to make those artifacts in the future, what he really lacked were other auxiliary materials. But these parangons could not be used to make artifacts. That would be a great waste. They were the wealth used to build the city. Amon put away all the parangons. That night, while the cavemen were dancing around the fire to celebrate, he, Link and Madanzo were discussing the next step in the temporary stone house. With this wealth, after a year and a half, the place would barely be able to accommodate explorers. Then, they could hire craftsmen and caravans from the surrounding countries. Link felt that there were too few people here, and there were still small tribes of cavemen in the mountains. After the flood, they would have a hard time surviving. It would be better to send people to recruit them and integrate them into the city. Amon nodded in agreement. Link was the tribe leader and had a lot of experience in managing tribes. However, building a city from scratch was too much of a test for him. There were too many things to do. Madanzo was a warrior. He was good at training soldiers in combat, but he was also a layman in the construction of a city. It was not easy for them to get together to discuss the future. The current situation was still manageable, but they could only learn as they explored. They all deeply felt one thing, and that was that talents were hard to come by. Madanzo and Aman thought of two people at the same time, Tich Sho, the mayor of Arcade, and Usser, the chief of the Highland Giants. When Princess Sisela was kidnapped, Tich Sho organized the whole town to prepare the supplies requested by the Highland Giants in just 1.5 days. He also organized a rescue team to deliver the supplies to the designated place on time. This seemingly impossible task was accomplished without causing any disturbances in the town. This talent was appreciated by Princess Sisela and Prince Banut. He had been promoted to a more important position in the city of Kish. As for the mage Usser, he was not a simple person either. To be able to organize and coordinate the actions of the simple-minded, muscular Highlanders was not an ordinary mage. His mastery of magic might not be very high, but in a sense, he was a talent even rarer than a supreme mage. It would be great if they had someone like Tich Sho or Usser by their side. Unfortunately, they could not find such a person for the time being. Madanzo suggested, Aesop is also a very capable man. He is like half a butler to Sayo. Sayo has shops in several cities and often organizes caravans to travel between cities. Aesop manages them very well. It would be a pity to leave him in Montefiore to guard a manor. It would be best if we could get him here. Chapter 120. Link smiled and said, Ammonius, this place is still desolate, but I can already see a rich city in front of me. If Aesop is really such a talent, he will be a good financial officer or a farmer in the future. He will be a real lord. These are secondary. Building a new home on this fertile land, every day there will be harvest, and every day you can witness new creations. As long as you have such a heart, life will be full of positive meaning. Madanzo smiled and punched him. You moved here from that damn place in the mountains, and the whole tribe cheered. Of course, you will think so. Others may not. But what you said is indeed very reasonable. It seems that you did not learn from Ammonius in vain. Aman nodded and said, when I return to Montefiore this time, I will talk to Aesop about this. If he is willing, Madanzo, I will send you to escort him here. Since you have talked about this truth, I have a question to ask seriously. You have already achieved the 6th level of the power of 2 sides, and the test you are about to face is the fusion of faith. So please look at your heart. What is your real desire and the path you want to embark on? Don't tell me it is to become a supreme mage or a supreme warrior. That is just the result of the process. Both of them stopped laughing, and Link said seriously, my wish is very simple. It is to lead my people out of the mountains and build a peaceful home. I want to see this wasteland become a brand new city and build a shrine for God Ammon. I am the one who will witness and accomplish all of this with my own hands. Ammon said with a smile, there is no hurry to build a temple. Wait until the first inner city wall has begun to take shape. Since you are willing to worship Murin, then build a statue for her. Link, Ammonius, what we want to build is your temple. Ammon smiled, there is no hurry. Just leave a place for me. Metatro replied with a straight face, I used to just want to restore my status as a noble and the title of my ancestors. But when I was finally able to do it, I realized that it wasn't the most sincere pursuit of my life. I am a man who is constantly searching and discovering. I have witnessed the miracle of Ammonius, and I just want to continue to witness and explore the ultimate existence of power. Ammon smiled, well then, go and verify it. To break through to the 7th level, not only do you need to rely on the growth of power, the most important is the breakthrough of the mind. Madanzo will return to Igut with me tomorrow, and Link will continue to lead the people here. Ammon didn't dare to leave all of the wealth he had obtained from Murin's treasure here. He only left a small portion for Link in case he needed it. The next day, he took Schrödinger and Madanzo away from the huge island surrounded by swamps, and set off again south through the wilderness. The return journey was different from the way they came. Medanzo had smoothly passed the trial, and Amon had also achieved the 7th level. Unknowingly, he had joined the ranks of the strongest on the continent. They did not encounter too many dangers along the way. When they came, they had almost figured out the general range of the various monsters. After crossing the inland lake and coming to the desert, they were not disturbed by the scorpions. Amon did not walk fast. This desolate and uninhabited place was the best place to demonstrate various high-level magic, which was what Medanzo, who had just achieved the 6th level, needed to learn. Amon himself was also practicing the 7th level of body arts. Only after fully mastering it would he be qualified to become a supreme warrior. What was the difference between a 7th level warrior and a 6th level warrior? Amon had a deep understanding that the power awakened in the blood could not only be stimulated from the inside out, but also be exerted to the extreme. It could even control the operation of the power in the environment. The power in the blood had become a way to stimulate energy, which was very similar to the effect of magic, or even the esoteric energy magic. There was a huge gap between a 6th level warrior and a 6th level mage. If it was not for a surprise attack in close quarters or a siege battle in a military formation, it would be difficult to defeat a mage of the same level who had mastered all kinds of magical means. But the gap between a 7th level warrior and a 7th level mage was obviously narrowed, and at least they could fight face to face. No wonder Enkidu was even willing to practice pure body arts. If he could reach the peak of this power, he would indeed not be afraid of any master. But warriors who could reach the level of Enkidu were too rare. After all, mages had more means, and magic was not only a manifestation of power. Along the way, Amon practiced the 7th level body arts while teaching Metatro various high-level magic arts. The two of them often sparred together and occasionally fought off monsters that suddenly appeared. In terms of actual combat skills, after this long journey, both of them had improved by leaps and bounds, especially Amon. Although he did not seem to have changed much, he was already a rare master on the continent, not to mention that he had mastered the power of 2 sides. More than a month later, they returned to the territory of Igut and entered the Cape States. Because it was a secret mission, the two were still in disguise and did not greet the local authorities. It was during this time that Julian received a letter. The messenger gave the letter to the concierge and left without leaving any message. The contents of the letter were unknown to outsiders. But on the 2nd night after Julian received the letter, a tragedy occurred in Cape. Fayal Judah, the clerk of Lord Rod Dick, hanged himself and left a suicide note, the content of which was full of repentance. In the note, Judas confessed that he was tempted by greed and bribed by Morton, the financial officer of Saya. Not only did he divulge the military and political secrets of the Cape States, but he also betrayed the secret agents sent to Cape States by the Temple of Isis. Judas' suicide note also mentioned another person, the financial officer of Saya, Morton. Judas had bribed Morton with a lot of money and obtained a lot of confidential information, which was praised by Rod Dick. But on the other hand, Judas had also accepted the bribe and divulged a lot of confidential military and political secrets that he knew. Neither of them was a good person, and the things they did were also very interesting. They bribed each other with a lot of money in exchange for information. The money used for bribery was the city's, but after such an exchange, it became their own, and they had both made contributions. It was indeed a business that brought both fame and fortune. At dawn, the servant found Judas' body hanging from the beam of the house. He had been dead for a long time. But one thing was puzzling. In addition to the handwritten suicide note on the table, there were also 30 silver coins at Judas' feet. Someone had written a line on the ground, "Return it to you." It seemed that after Judas' death, someone had quietly entered his room. Whether Judas committed suicide or was murdered, there were different opinions. Rod Dick was deeply enraged. The matter was eventually treated as suicide, but the governor of the city ordered a secret investigation to trace the person who wrote on the ground, but no clues were found. Only Julian knew how Judas died and vaguely guessed who the person who wrote was, but he did not mention it. Although the Supreme Mage understood in his heart, there was one thing that always puzzled him. Why would someone put 30 silver coins on Judas' body? What kind of symbolism was this? Although the matter was handled in private, it was not completely covered up. The city of Saya also had spies here. Through Judah's servant, they learned the contents of the suicide note, and the news spread back to Shmuel and Goliath, so Morton was taken down for questioning. Judas was dead and was implicated thousands of miles away, while Amon and Madanzo had left Cape States and returned to Montefiore. The first thing Amon did when he returned to Montefiore was to go to his manor and ask Aesop if he was willing to go to the wilderness to help the cavemen build their homes. Aesop readily agreed. He said to Amon, "I was originally a slave, and you gave me the identity of a free man. But the so-called freedom is not only about the bondage of identity, but also about being able to witness the traces of my own life, just like seeing the trajectory of the stars in the sky. I am looking forward to such a mission, in order to repay you, and also to examine myself. Master Allah, if you allow me, I also hope to make all of this into a story and sing it in the world." Amon was slightly startled, then smiled and said, "I know you like to tell stories. The legends of the continent and the past of the gods have all been made up by you. You are telling the world in your eyes and the wishes of your heart. If what I do will also become a story made up by people, you can tell it in the future if you want." During the time Amon was away, Aesop not only took care of the manor in good order, but also used the money left by Amon to lead the servants to do business and make a lot of money. Although Amon did not care about the money, it showed that Aesop was very capable. He sent Madanzo to escort Aesop to Link first, and then returned to Montefiore to meet him. After everything was arranged, he returned to the Temple of Isis to report, while Schrödinger was still mingling with the cats outside the temple. It had been half a year since Amon left Montefiore, and the guard captain of the temple archives had been replaced by a new person. He still lived in the original small courtyard, and for the time being, he only received a salary but had nothing to do. The adoratress soon summoned him, and the location was still the study where she usually handled affairs. After greeting him according to the etiquette, Maria once again asked the servants to leave. This time, without the adoratress' special instruction, Gabriel took the initiative to go out and close the door. Anyway, every time Maria saw Amon, she always wanted to talk to him alone. When Gabriel went out, he looked back at Amon meaningfully, with a look of inquiry and admiration in his eyes. When the two were alone, it had become a habit or a tacit understanding. They did not speak for a period of time, just looking at each other. In front of the adoratress, according to etiquette, Amon could not take the initiative to speak. After a long time, Maria said quietly, "Amon, you have changed again." Amon smiled slightly. "Why, don't you recognize me?" Chapter 121. The Source of Life. It was a simple sentence, but it revealed too many unspoken meanings. It also revealed Maria's longing and worries. Because of this, when he appeared in front of her, she felt that he was particularly clear and real. Even this silent gaze was especially valuable. Felt the same way. After returning from a long journey, he saw Maria again. The one sitting in front of him was the real echo in his heart. In the past, whenever he saw Maria, he would be in a trance. He couldn't tell whether she was the holy maiden of the Temple of Isis or the young echo he met in Duk. There was always an indescribable conflict in his heart. But now, he could finally see clearly. She was her, the echo in his heart, and the holy maiden in front of him. Didn't want to tell her that on the night when he killed the two-headed serpent and climbed to the other side of the lake, he saw her in his meditation. It wasn't a dream. It was as if it had happened in reality. They returned to the tower in the town of Duk. They were no longer the same as before. He was the present Aya, and she was the present Maria. But hugged her just like he did in the past. He held her in his arms, caressed her, and really kissed her. When the sun rose the next day, opened his eyes and smiled. When he stood up, the inexplicable entanglement in his heart had been relieved. He looked at the world under the sun calmly. At this moment, Ah's smile was as bright as the sun. He smiled and said, "Holy maiden, I have two things to report to you this time." Maria also looked at him. The luster in her eyes was like the starry sky in the silent night. I was waiting for you to say it. First of all, I have investigated the topography of the area around the original site of Duk, and recorded the information to the priest committee of the shrine. Maria nodded with satisfaction. I have read your report. The description of the topography is exactly the same as the results of other investigations. You also made a sand table and made a detailed demonstration. The most important thing is the distribution of various monsters. Your investigation is the most detailed. You had to travel through those places on foot to get valuable information. This is worthy of special praise. High Priest George has already made a request to reward you, but I have temporarily suppressed this report and did not reply to it. It is not that I do not want to praise you, but the contents of the report are not enough to reward you for your achievements. What about the second thing you want to say? Is it related to your personal training? Nodded. Yes, as you expected, I have become a 7th level Supreme Warrior. Maria smiled, a pure and happy smile. Many people can see it, but you didn't say it yourself. Did you want to be the first to tell me? According to past practices, the city will hold a celebration ceremony for you, and you will also receive the status of a noble of the Egyptian Empire. Go back and prepare well. What do I need to prepare? Maria thought for a moment and smiled again. After I came to the shrine, you are the first subordinate to be promoted to a Supreme Warrior. In fact, there is nothing to prepare. I know your name is but you still need an official title. Not only must it be recorded in the register of the nobles of the city, but also in the awakening ceremony of the power of the shrine. Was slightly startled, and immediately reacted. The second awakening ceremony of power? I am allowed to learn hieroglyphs and practice magic at the same time. It was rare for the Holy Lady to show a bit of playfulness. Yes, I have already arranged it. It is up to you whether you can achieve this achievement. The second awakening of power is not necessarily successful, and only supreme mages can hold such a ceremony. I allow you to make a request and choose any supreme mage in the Temple of Isis to preside over the ceremony for you as a special reward. Will you choose Vord, the 9th level supreme mage with the highest achievement, or me, who has just become a 7th level supreme mage? I have to remind you that the higher the achievement of the supreme mage, the greater the possibility of success in the ceremony, but the most important thing is whether you can awaken the power bestowed by the gods. It requires a process, and the ceremony is just a symbol, like the opening of a door. I have never presided over it, and I have no experience. Replied without thinking, everything has a beginning. I am honored to ask the Holy Lady to preside over the second awakening ceremony for me. This is the first time you have presided over such a ceremony, which makes me feel even more honored. Maria kept smiling, her eyes like a pair of crescent moons. Well, it's settled then. I will preside over the second awakening ceremony for you. I hope it will be successful. Stood up and saluted. Thank you, Holy Lady, it will definitely be successful. At this moment, when he called her Holy Lady, he was as calm as when he called Iko. He could guarantee that the ceremony would be successful, because was already a supreme mage. As long as he went through this ceremony, he would be able to use many magic spells, and people would only praise the magic of the Holy Lady. However, he was also very interested in the second awakening ritual of this power. Perhaps he could learn a lot from it for the cultivation of the power of two sides. When he was about to leave, Maria stood up and asked again, have you carefully read the ancient books I asked you to read? She was referring to the military books and information related to the Legion's operations. Nodded. Yes, in addition to the catalog you gave me, I also tried to find relevant documents to study. I simulated and deduced in my mind for a long time. Maria said again, it's not enough to just memorize them, you also have to think about how to use them. You were able to travel through such a wasteland, and you have learned so many military books, I believe you should have experienced commanding troops in various environments. Said thoughtfully, Holy Lady, are you implying something to me? Maria replied with a deep meaning, you will soon understand. If you want to establish a meritorious deed that can pardon your clansmen, success or failure depends on this. A few days later, the Lord of Montefiore, Jehudi-Hotep, personally held a celebration ceremony for and issued an announcement. The people heard the good news. The glorious warrior of the Temple of Isis, was promoted to a 7th-level supreme warrior. The name given to him by his drunkard father, Allah Sumasaya Hovaanlayate, was finally put to use for the first time, and was even written in the temple's register by the priests. But this long list of titles was too difficult to remember, so people still called him the Great Warrior. The one who was most happy about this news was not himself, but his friend, the merchant Osayu. Osayu said excitedly to everyone he met, "My vision was absolutely right, I knew that would become a true noble." Today, he really became a respectable supreme warrior. When he was drunk, he often bragged to his friends, Lord once said that I have the hope of becoming a noble in the future." His friends laughed at him and said, "Forget it, why do you think you're so fat? Do you still want to practice body arts and become a supreme warrior with such a fat appearance?" Shortly after the celebration ceremony, went through another ceremony in a hall of the Temple of Isis. The host was the noble Holy Lady, who awakened the power bestowed upon him by the gods. According to common sense, this ceremony was almost impossible to succeed, because was not a devout believer in the gods in front of him. He only examined his heart, and silently looked at Iko, who was holding a magic staff. Because the ceremony was presided over by the Holy Lady herself, it was quite grand. First had to bathe in incense, put on a beautiful and mighty armor, put on a good weapon, salute the gods, offer sacrifices, and accept the people's congratulations. When walked to the ceremony hall, the warriors lined up on both sides of the long stairs sprinkled lotus petals, while the priests in the temple sang in unison. Maria stood in front of the altar with a golden crown on her head and a magic staff in her hand. When the ceremony officially began, Maria gently raised the Holy Lady's magic staff. Her movements were indescribably noble and elegant, and her mouth sang a poem praising the goddess of Isis. The staff emitted a soft golden light that enveloped who was kneeling in front of the altar. This was the blessing of Isis, magic. Maria first comforted body and mind, letting him feel the magic in peace. Then the golden light began to flicker and hover, surrounding body like a floating veil. There were changes in brightness and density. This was the most basic magic. When the magic power was released, it guided into a calm state of meditation. Maria's voice sounded in mind, "Please let go of all worries and hesitation, forget all worries and sorrow. Sincerely pray to God, implore God to grant you strength. When you enter a calm state of meditation, close your eyes and gaze at the majestic image of God." It was like a ray of light rising from the eastern horizon, spreading its grace everywhere. This light dispels the darkness, the earth awakens from its slumber, and the world is no longer lost. Please open your heart to receive it, and absorb the strength bestowed by God. You will awaken in the mist, spread your wings and fly. Didn't resist Maria's guidance. When the blessing of Isis enveloped him, completely opened his heart and entered a calm and clear state of meditation. Although he wasn't a believer of Isis, he didn't have a trace of contempt in his heart. He integrated his beliefs into Maria's devotion and carefully experienced it. Chapter 122. The world outside the body seemed to have a soul, and heaven and earth breathed in and out, with a vivid breath. How to communicate with it with one's own body and mind was the source of power given by the gods, and it was also the source of the various magical methods of the mages. Amon forgot that he was already a supreme mage, and as if welcoming a new life at dawn, he went to re-experience the source of power. Amon seemed to see the energy of the rhythm of life between heaven and earth. He wanted to grasp a ray of inspiration in this ceremony and integrate it with his own body and mind. In the future, he would be able to find this state alone in meditation. This was the second awakening of power. Indeed, only supreme mages could hold such a ceremony for a warrior. Maria's ceremony for Amon took almost twice as long as usual. She was not stingy with her mind and magic power. In the eyes of outsiders, this was also the first time that the adoratress had held a second awakening of power. Of course, she had to familiarize herself with the process. Warriors generally did not awaken the power given by the gods immediately after the ceremony. They still had to practice the most basic magic meditation and find the state that they were guided into during the ceremony on their own. This kind of ceremony was usually held only once, and it was also a considerable consumption for a supreme mage. If the first time was not successful, in theory, although it could still be done again, the chance of success was already very small. No supreme mage would repeatedly struggle for a warrior. Even if the effect of holding the ceremony again was already very small, Maria did not seem to mind giving Amon a few more chances. A few days after the ceremony, she sent someone to ask Amon if he could feel the awakened power in the state of meditation. Amon replied, "Thank you for your concern, adoratress. I have succeeded." After hearing the news, Maria immediately gave an order to the high priest George to send a teacher to teach Amon Egyptian hieroglyphs. Amon had to pretend to learn the hieroglyphs of Igut again. The teacher praised Amon for his incomparable intelligence and mastery of hieroglyphs in the shortest time. People were not surprised by this. Becoming a supreme warrior at a young age, how could Amon not be a talented and intelligent person? Moreover, if one mastered the writing of the secular language, learning the hieroglyphs was actually not too difficult. One only needed to understand the special and complicated rules within it. The shrine had also specially sent 2 fifth-level mages to guide Amon in his practice of low-level magic. As a great sorcerer, Amon appeared to be quite modest. He listened very carefully and did not put on airs. However, he also rarely asked questions. In short, he was a very fast learner, and it didn't take long for him to come into contact with the content of advanced magic. The 2 fifth-level mages found it difficult to continue teaching Amon, so they went back to report to their superiors and asked for another teacher for the supreme warrior Amon. As a result, Crazy Ol's old friend, George, who was now the high priest of the Temple of Isis, said, "Let me personally guide the supreme warrior Amon." George took over the task, but he did not teach Amon any magic. He only gave him the authority to read all the magic books in the archives, and if there was something he did not understand, he could ask. The high priest was usually very busy and could not specially teach Amon magic. The archives was under the jurisdiction of George, and Amon was very familiar with the place, so there was no need for him to waste time on teaching. With this convenient condition, Amon could finally find a chance to read another book that Schrödinger had asked him to read. However, before he could do so, he was entangled by another matter. It was very sudden. The adoratress personally ordered the unemployed supreme warrior Amon to live alone in a spacious courtyard with a meditation room. He was to bathe and pray for the next few days and not go out. If he wanted to read any books, he was to write down a list and ask the servants to bring it to him. She asked him to wait quietly for the messenger from the capital of Igut. Something important was about to happen. The adoratress sent some military books to Amon. These were all books Amon had read before, but Maria wanted him to review them again. At the same time, various military exercise props were also sent, including the topographic map of the Empire of Igut, various models of marching and encampment, and even the drawings and models of supply and transport ships at sea, so that Amon could familiarize himself with the books. Maria's move was clearly a hint that the capital would send someone to test Amon. If the supreme warrior Amon could pass this test, he would soon receive a very important appointment. In all likelihood, he would become a general in the army. If this was the case, it meant that the war around the town of Duk was about to begin. The actual situation was even more shocking than Amon's speculation. Maria recommended Amon, not as an ordinary general, but as the head of a newly formed legion. The Empire of Igut already had 3 legions ready to go. According to custom, the legions were named after the gods, including the most elite Horus Legion and the Legion of Isis. The Legion of Set, as an outpost, had already assembled at the border of Cape States. The head of the Legion of Set was Rod Dick, the governor of the Cape States, and the chief priest of the legion was the 8th-level supreme mage Julian. Normally, the head of an imperial legion should be at least a supreme warrior, but as the governor of Cape, Rod Dick was more suitable to manage the legion. The Legion of Seat was mainly responsible for the logistical management of the army, base supplies, and the transportation of food and fodder. The necessary war supplies had been stockpiled at the front lines of Cape through various channels. The pharaoh had sent a supreme warrior from the capital, Peter Machen, to be the commander of the front lines. The real elites of the empire were the Horus Legion from the capital and the Legion of Isis from Montefiore. The head of the Legion of Isis was Ankh, the chief supreme warrior of the Temple of Isis. The chief priest was the 9th-level supreme mage Vord, and the commander of the front lines was the supreme warrior Ryushin. The chief priest of the Horus Legion was Ricard, the high priest of the Horus Temple of Igut. The commander of the front lines was the 8th-level supreme warrior Van Verts, and the head of the legion was the pharaohs of Igut himself. Lazith too, who loved grandiosity and success, was going to lead the legion himself. An entire legion had 5,000 warriors and 50 priests. This was the combat force that was officially put into the battlefield. The daily consumption of supplies was as high as a mountain. If the servants and civilian workers were included, there would be at least 20,000 people providing various logistical services around the legion. These 3 legions were, of course, not all the military forces of the Empire of Igut, but it was impossible to launch an expedition without the strength of the whole country. This time, the strongest elites of the empire had been dispatched. Pharaoh would personally lead the expedition, leaving a legion in the capital city of Thebes to guard the northwestern border of the empire. The Adoratrice would also stay in Montefiore, and there would be a garrison legion here. If one wanted to directly capture the Hittite kingdom, the most convenient route would be to set off from Montefiore, go to sea along the Nile River, and land there. But Pharaoh's purpose this time was to establish a strategic base in the area where the town of Duk used to be, so he chose to set off from the Cape States and attack by land through the desert. According to the plan formulated by the military council, in addition to the 3 main legions mentioned above, another legion was needed to advance together, which was a newly formed miscellaneous legion called the Anare Legion. En and Ra were the names of the same god, the head of the Ennead worshipped by the people of Igut. It was said that he was the father of the gods and was born in the lotus of the beginning, and also the oldest god of the sun. He had many titles. He was called An at night, Are during the day, Hepri in the morning, Adam at night. Amongst the Ennead, his title was also Nuvan. According to the understanding of the human world, although this god was the oldest and was known as the father of the gods, he was not the most important god worshipped by the empire of Igut. In ancient myths and legends, the goddess Isis defeated Anare with a trick, obtained the secrets of this god, and gained greater power. Horus, the son of the goddess Isis, later became the king god worshipped by the people of Igut, and was also the most important god among the Ennead. It was said that the ancient god Anare had retired to the source of the Nile River. Interestingly, in the long list of names of Ammon, there was also the name Anare, which could be understood as night and day. The Anare legion would not converge with the main army. It would follow along the northern coastline while Pharaoh's army advanced. On the one hand, it would act as a flank support, and on the other hand, its main task was to prevent the Hittite kingdom's army from landing on the sea and cutting off the main army's supply line. The strategic position of such a legion was very awkward. If Pharaoh won a complete victory, it would not make the most important contribution. If Pharaoh was defeated and retreated, the Anare legion would need to leave the coastline and advance, desperately resisting the pursuers to cover Pharaoh. If the Hittite kingdom really did make a large detour along the coastline, the legion would be cannon fodder before the main army counterattack. But the biggest possibility was that the legion would always be responsible for the task of covering and guarding along the coastline, a march of thousands of miles, and would not participate in the real decisive battle of the main force. As long as this mission was completed, the legion would be considered to have made a contribution to the empire, and the illustrious lords would naturally be unwilling to accept such a difficult task. So the saintess took the opportunity to recommend Ammon. But after all, this involved the appointment of a legion commander, and the empire had to be cautious in handing over 5,000 soldiers to Ammon. So, they organized a special assessment. Aman lived alone in the courtyard for more than 10 days, and was finally invited to the government office in Montefiore, where he met a few prominent ministers of the empire. 7 people sat in a semicircle in a large hall, and in the middle was the saintess, Maria. On the left of Maria was the military minister Izen from the capital Thebes, and beside Izen was the high priest Suska from the main shrine of the capital Horus. On the left of Suska was the mayor of Montefiore, Diatuyen. On the right of Maria were the 3 high priests of the temple of Isis, Vord, Burke, and George. These lords formed a temporary assessment committee, and it was up to them to decide whether or not to appoint Aman as the legion commander of the Inare Legion. P.S. When I was preparing the offerings for the night, I opened a box of exquisite mooncakes and was surprised to find that it was filled with monthly tickets. Ha 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 ha, it's the festival, just kidding. Chapter 123. Aman did not have a seat. After saluting the lords one by one, he stood in the middle of the hall and waited for the questions. The first to ask was Izen, the Minister of Military Affairs of the Empire, who was also a head of a legion in his early years and had a lot of experience in military campaigns. He asked Aman many questions, and the young supreme warrior answered them fluently. Lord Izen also ordered people to bring maps, sand tables, and various military instruments for Aman to simulate on the spot how to organize troops, arrange battle formations, and other actual combat commands. Aman also did a good job without any flaws. The assessment went on for a whole day, and continued after lunch. The high priest of the capital, Suska, played a game of chess with Aman, using a real military sand table. The result was also very satisfactory. The assessment continued the next morning, and the 7 lords asked all kinds of questions, some of which were beyond the scope of military operations. Aman tried his best to answer all of them, and then took his orders and left to wait for the results. The 7 lords began to discuss, but Maria did not speak. The final opinion was 3-3, with the number of people in favor and against being equal. Those who agreed with Aman were Izen, Vord, and George, while those who opposed were Suska, Diatuyen, and Burke. The main reason for the opposition was that Aman had no experience in commanding a battle, and the main reason was because of his background. Aman used to be a resident of the town of Duk, a dependency of the Hittite kingdom. It was doubtful whether he could guarantee absolute loyalty to the empire of Igut in a battle. The 2 sides were at a stalemate, and in the end, it still depended on the opinion of the adoratress. Maria pondered and said, after these 2 days of assessment, there is no longer any doubt whether Aman is suitable to be the head of the Inare Legion. We all know very well that this legion will not participate in the real battle of the main forces, but only carry out coordinated vigilance and cover missions. Aman is completely qualified for this position. Does anyone have any objections to this? The other 6 did not object. Maria continued, as for whether this person is loyal or not, haven't you heard of his deeds? His conduct is proof enough of his noble character, and that is why I recommend him. This man was indeed a miner from Duk. He was the one who offered the gods Tyr and returned Nero's belongings. I'm sure you all know what happened to Duk, don't you? Moreover, his clansmen were all under the control of the empire. According to the latest news, the king of Hittite claimed to have received an oracle from Enlil. Everyone should have heard of this oracle, right? If you were Aman, what would you think? There was also an interlude regarding the latest developments in the Hittite kingdom. According to the king of Hittite Lucier and the Hittite Academy, Enlil had sent down the latest oracle. He used his divine power to launch the great flood, not only to punish and expel the sinners, but also to cleanse the land of sin, and to give the people thousands of miles of fertile land. It would become a land blessed by the gods, and the people would be told to cultivate the fertile land and build a prosperous and happy home. The oracle was conveyed to all parts of the kingdom, and the people were excited, especially the unemployed, wandering explorers, and farmers of some of the barren cities of the empire. People flooded into the shrine to thank Enlil for his blessing, and vowed to cultivate the fertile land given by the gods as a sacred cause. The altar was filled with flowers and all kinds of precious tributes, and everyone was praising the greatness, mercy, and solemnity of the gods. In the midst of this uproar, there was a group of forgotten people who could only silently grieve. They were the original miners of Duk. They were already sinners punished by the gods and hated by the people of the kingdom. Whether the dead were innocent or guilty, they no longer knew anything. But what about the descendants who were still alive in the world? How did they feel? It was impossible for Aman to return to the kingdom of Enril. Even if he wanted to, there was no place for him there. Besides, the surviving people of Duk were all in the empire of Igut. Aman could not and had no reason to betray the empire. In fact, not only Enril had received the oracle, but not long ago, the pharaohs of Igut and the high priests of the main shrine of Horus also received the oracle of King Horus. The great god Horus declared that in the center of the continent, there would be 1,000 miles of fertile land, a symbol of the cruelty and evil of the foreign gods, and a brand new territory for the great empire of Igut to establish its eternal glory. He called on his people to go there and build a home for the people of Igut and build a real shrine, so that the glory of the gods could shine on the continent. This oracle became the supreme decree of Lazith II to launch the war, and Pharaoh himself decided to lead the army himself. He had been planning this war for a long time. To be able to open up a brand new territory in the center of the continent was the greatest ambition of Pharaoh's life. This oracle had not been officially released to the people of Igut, but when the army officially set out, it would spread throughout the country. At that time, the people of Igut would also rush into the shrines to cheer, praising the holiness and greatness of the gods and Pharaoh. The situation was just like what Goliath said to Aman. It can be foreseen that there will also be disputes between the gods, and people will drive their own desires in the name of the gods. The adoratress mentioned the oracle of the foreign god Enril and the past of the town of Duk, and no one could refute her. Perhaps to dispel the doubts in everyone's hearts, Maria looked around and said with a smile, "In fact, you don't have to worry too much. Although the head of the legion is the highest officer of the legion, according to the law of the empire, the chief priest of the legion has the responsibility of supervising the army and supervising the war. If the head of the legion wants to transfer the chief priest, he must also get the approval of the chief priest. We only need to choose a trustworthy supreme mage to be the chief priest of the legion, and it will be foolproof." At this time, the high priest of the temple of Isis, George, smiled bitterly and said, "Marching to war is a hard job for supreme mages, let alone the chief priest of the NRA Legion. It is either just a decoration or a thankless task, and I don't think many people will be willing to do it. Thank you, the adoratress, for your trust and promotion, for recommending me as the high priest of the temple of Isis. This time, I volunteer to be the chief priest of the NRA Legion. I don't have any other requests. I just hope that the Ministry of Military Affairs, the Ministry of Finance, and the city of Montefiore can give me enough support, and not dismiss a miscellaneous army with a casual attitude." The matter was thus settled, and Aman officially became the head of the Legion of the Empire. Although it was only a temporary miscellaneous army, his status was still there, and his status was equivalent to that of the deputy governor of a city. The following days were very busy for Aman. After taking office, there was a lot of work to deal with, and he even regretted sending Aesop away so early. In formal battles, the head of the legion usually could not directly go to the front line to fight. He was the commander of the whole army, and an accident could easily cause the entire front line to collapse. Therefore, there was a need for a vanguard commander to fight on the front line, and now this position was also vacant. Maria let Aman choose himself, and if he really could not find a suitable person, she agreed to send Gabriel. From this, it could be seen that His Majesty Pharaoh did not attach much importance to the NRA Legion, although the military council had formulated a march plan of coordinated operations, flanking guard, and covering. But in Pharaoh's mind, this miscellaneous army was actually dispensable, and the army led by him would be invincible. But Aman himself could not ignore it. Gabriel was Maria's most important helper, and naturally, he could not easily take Gabriel away. Moreover, this supreme guardian had a high status, and Aman could not command him at will. After all, Amon still lacked enough foundation and prestige, and it was difficult to find a vanguard commander who was completely loyal and obedient to him. After thinking for a long time, Amon submitted an application to the city of Montefiore, recommending and promoting a person. It was the captain of the guards of Mount Horeb, the 6th-level warrior John, who had been punished and sent out. As the supreme commander of the legion, although he could not only rely on personal force to win the battle, in the minds of the soldiers, the personal strength and charm of the commander were still part of the prestige. Therefore, the head of the legion was usually held by a supreme warrior, and the situation like Rod Dick was only a special case. Amon was already a supreme warrior, but he had not really shown his strength, so it was difficult to convince the noble generals who were born in the Igut. The captain of the guards of Mount Horeb, John, was an exception. He had long been obedient to Amon, and he had also been taught and guided by Amon. This time, it was Amon's recommendation that promoted him from the desolate Mount Horeb to the legion, so naturally, he was willing to listen to orders. In addition to the vanguard commander, Amon had another task that he had to deal with himself, and that was to form a personal guard. There was such a structure in the legion, but it had to be built by the commander himself. There were not many personal guards, but they were the most elite force, and their duty was to protect the commander himself. Whether it was charging to kill the enemy or breaking out of the encirclement to escape, the personal guard had to follow the commander closely. The captain of the personal guard was also directly appointed by the commander himself, and others had no right to command. The personal guards were equivalent to a small independent private army, numbering no more than 100 people. Although they were also provided with weapons and pay by the army commander would often pay out of his own pocket to equip them with better weapons, and they would also receive more generous rewards. After all, this was related to the safety of Amon himself. Personal guards not only needed to be absolutely loyal, but also had the courage to risk their lives to protect the commander. If it were other officers, there would be various conditions and restrictions on the appointment, but the appointment of the captain of the personal guard was decided by the commander himself, and no one would interfere, even if he hired a wandering warrior. Because of this, Amon directly appointed Medanzo, a wandering warrior from Babylon, as the captain of the personal guard. As for the members of the personal guard, Medanzo would be selected from the soldiers of the legion. The great merchant of Montefiore, Scio, finally met the newly promoted legion commander, Sir Amon. Amon brought Medanzo to visit personally, which made Scio feel flattered, and he was so excited that he stuttered. Amon came to reminisce about the old days, and at the same time, he also brought the warrant of the mayor of Montefiore, appointing Scio as the logistics officer of the NRA Legion. Amon even smiled and asked Scio if he was willing to accept the position. Scio's face turned red, and his head nodded like a chick pecking on rice. He stuttered, "Yes, I'm very willing, Sir Amon. I've been looking forward to this day for a long time. You really haven't forgotten me." Scio was not a fool, and he was very clear that it was difficult for a commoner merchant to have a noble status, no matter how rich he was. This was the best opportunity of his life. Although there was a certain risk in organizing the logistics of the legion, it would not be more dangerous than the soldiers at the front lines. As long as he made contributions and was recommended by the legion commander, he might be granted a noble status by the pharaohs of Igut. Glory was only one aspect, and it would be much more convenient for him to do business in the future. In the legion, there was naturally a logistics officer officially appointed by the empire, who was responsible for the handover, statistics, and distribution of supplies. Amon appointed Scio to be the logistics officer, and his main responsibility was to organize the caravans outside the legion, and follow the legion to transport supplies. He was very clear that this merchant had no other abilities, but he was very good at this business. With the order of the pharaoh, the merchants of each city had to obey the distribution of supplies for the march. Scio happened to be very familiar with this, and he was also the most suitable candidate that Amon could find. Being a logistics officer was a lucrative job. During times of war, he had the right to requisition military supplies from the cities along the way, and after the war, the empire's financial department would settle the accounts. It was needless to say that the profits were plentiful. Sayo was very grateful to Aman, and according to the custom, he presented a large sum of money to Aman on the spot. This time, he was generous and not stingy. After all, wool comes from the sheep, and he could earn back many times more in the future. In terms of wealth, Aman was not short of money at all, so he refused on the spot with a smile. When Sayo saw that Aman did not accept it, he was so anxious that his forehead was sweating. After a long time of begging, the guard captain Madanzo finally nodded and agreed to accept the gift, mainly to equip the head's personal guards with better armor and weapons. These should have been paid for by Aman himself, but Sayo generously did it for him. As soon as all the preparations were ready, Aman received the empire's order to lead the NRA Legion to set off. With 50 mages and 5,000 warriors, he marched along the east bank of the Nile towards the sea. The logistics team was divided into two parts. A small part was the convoy responsible for daily supplies, while the majority was loaded onto ships and sailed along the Nile to follow the army on land. The Legion also sent warships to escort them. Although it was just a miscellaneous army that was not valued, it still looked majestic and mighty on the road. The 80 guards of Aman were all armored cavalry, while the 5,000 warriors were composed of charioteers, archers, and heavy infantry with javelins and shields. John led the cavalry in front, while the light infantry phalanxes brought up the rear. Looking from afar, the reflection of weapons and armors under the sun formed a sea of stars. Sitting in the spacious and comfortable chariot, Aman was quite emotional. When he first came to Montefiore, he was chased all the way and almost died by the Nile. But now, when he left, he had become a commander commanding thousands of soldiers. The one he should really thank was Maria. It was her who silently helped him get to where he was today. Aman had no intention of fighting against the army of the Hittite kingdom, but this war was inevitable whether he participated or not. He only wanted to make enough contributions to pardon the Dushians and lead them back to their homeland in the future. Aman knew very well that for the time being, what they could fight for in this war was not the thousands of miles of fertile land. It would take at least a year and a half for the swamps around the town of Duk to completely reseed to accommodate the army. The pharaoh of Egypt was somewhat impatient to launch an expedition at this time. However, judging from the strategic layout, the pharaoh's purpose was to establish a base at the inland lake first so that he could occupy a favorable position in future disputes. As the flood receded completely, he could take over the entire fertile land and make it the new territory of the empire. The pharaohs of Igut, Lazith II, was full of confidence. The strength of the empire of Igut was also recognized by all countries. The outcome of this war seemed to be without doubt. Although Aman was in the army of the empire of Igut, he was not optimistic about the victory of Igut. The reason was simple. He felt that Lazith II seemed to underestimate this war too much. This was a matter of life and death for so many people, but in the eyes of Lazith II, it was like a game. Lord Pharaoh did not know what the enemy thought of Aman, but at least Lazith II did not pay enough attention to the coordination of the NRA Legion. It was like throwing a tank that was about to fall apart and letting the Legion follow him into battle. And it was only after Aman had assembled all the parts on the tank that it could operate normally. Pharaoh thought that he was unstoppable and that it was enough to lead the most elite army to victory. But in such an important war between countries, his carelessness in this aspect had exposed many problems. If Aman was the commander of the entire army, he would never treat the NRA Legion so carelessly, even if the status of the Legion was not very important. The speed of the Legion did not depend on how fast the carriages and horses could run, but whether the logistics and supplies could keep up. The supplies of the NRA Legion mainly relied on ships. Although the transport ships were equipped with long oars, the main power at sea was still the sails. The Legion advanced steadily according to the established route. Aman did not waste the opportunity to march along the coastline. Although it was unlikely that he would participate in the main battle, he did not forget to drill along the way. The coordination between the charioteers, archers, javelin throwers, cavalry and infantry was something that Aman had learned in military books and practiced on the sand table, but he had never commanded a real battle formation. During a break in the march, Amon ordered the generals to command their soldiers to take turns to drill, and he brought Madanzo to watch the actual battle. The NRA Legion had just been formed, and the previous training was very lax. But to become an official soldier of the Empire, the minimum requirement was to be a level 1 swordsman who had practiced physical skills. When these people really fought together, they should be quite strong. There was a custom in the army of the Empire of Igut, or rather, a tradition. The supplies and provisions allocated by the Ministry of Military Affairs would be intercepted by the commanding officer according to a certain proportion, and the rest would be distributed to the soldiers. Needless to say, military supplies could also be sold for a lot of money on the market. This money was for the personal use of the commanding officer, such as equipping his personal guards, rewarding military achievements in his own name, bribing the enemy, and so on. Under normal circumstances, the conventional rule was 30%, and the remaining 70% would be distributed to the soldiers below. That would be considered the full amount. But for the miscellaneous legions that were not valued, the quality of the equipment and the quantity of the troops could not compare to the elite legions of the Empire, and the proportion of the interception ratio was usually much higher. This would create a vicious cycle, and the combat effectiveness of the legion would be even lower. Chapter 124. On the one hand, Amon did this because he had just taken control of the legion and needed to win over the people and stabilize their morale. On the other hand, he was not short of money. In addition to the head of the legion, there was also the chief priest. The chief priest had 50 mages under his command, and they were treated very well. Amon himself was very honest, but he did not ask the chief priest, George, to suffer with him. The resources and salaries that belonged to the priests were all allocated to Edu to handle on his own. As a result, George also distributed all the supplies and equipment, leaving only 10% of the soldiers' salaries, completely following Amon's practice. As the high priest of the Temple of Isis, there were plenty of opportunities for George to fish for benefits, so there was no need to make a fuss in this regard. The equipment and salaries were sufficient, but Amon was not lenient in the training of the soldiers. He intended to be strict with the army, but he met a commander who was even stricter than him. John was known for his bad temper when he was on Mount Horeb. Now that he had come to the legion to lead the soldiers to war, how could he tolerate the soldiers being lazy? Whoever did not put in their best effort during the drill would be dragged out by the frontline commander and given a good beating, bypassing the lower-ranking officers. On the contrary, Amon played the role of leniency, often persuading John not to be too harsh and to deal with the soldiers according to the normal military discipline. Amon also told John not to be too impatient and not to increase the burden of the soldiers. For example, if the archers were required to shoot 15 arrows in a row in a battle formation, then they would shoot 15 arrows during the drill. There was no need to force them to shoot 20 arrows. In the end, they would lose their accuracy and strength. After all, they were still on the march and needed to rest and build up their strength. Under Amon's guidance on Mount Horeb, John was gradually able to control the irrepressible agitation, but the power of agitation did not disappear. When they met again, the 6th-level warrior had become stronger than before. There were still times when he was irritated and impulsive, but he found a way to turn this agitation into an explosion of power, and he could suddenly enter a more powerful, flexible, and perceptive state. This seemed to be a strange, explosive awakening of power, which was a very interesting discovery for Amon. Amon had tested this explosive power of John. When he entered this state, even Madanzo did not dare to face it head-on. If Amon didn't use magic and only used martial arts, he would only be able to suppress it. In this state, John became stronger than usual, but after this state ended, he would also become weaker than usual and would need to rest for a period to recover. According to Amon's analysis, if Hardadef used too much of this explosive power, it might cause unpredictable damage to his body and mind, which reminded him to be more careful. In addition to strict requirements and proper command, there were 2 other conditions to achieve the best results. The first was diet and nutrition, which Amon ordered the quartermaster to absolutely guarantee. The fleet organized by Sayo provided sufficient dairy and meat products. The other condition was the cooperation of the mages. Mages would not directly rush to the front line in the battle. Their role was mainly reflected in two aspects. One was to use a variety of magic to assist the soldiers in fighting, and the other was to improve the morale of the army. Magic could not only be offensive, but also supportive. For example, although healing magic could not immediately heal the wounds of the soldiers, it could temporarily make them forget the pain. Blessings magic could make the soldiers braver and no longer fear. Some brilliant spiritual magic could even give the soldiers a belief that they would win and encourage them to risk their lives in the battle. This was very important in the battle of a large legion. Often the defeat of a battle was not because of the number of soldiers killed or wounded, but because the morale of the troops collapsed. Because once the soldiers lost confidence, they would not have the courage to fight anymore. Despair would infect each other, and the commanders would not be able to control it. These mages were used to living like princes. Marching was already a hardship for them, so they generally wouldn't use this force unless it was a real battle. But Amon asked the mages to play a third role outside of the battlefield, which was to form a formation to cast healing magic and blessings during training, so that the soldiers could recover from fatigue and constantly improve their morale to maintain a confident and excited state of battle. Amon could not directly command the mages. He had to give orders through Lord George. The chief priest, George, was very cooperative. According to Amon's request, he divided the mages under him into 4 teams, each team of 12 mages. They would form a magic formation and take turns to help Amon train the soldiers every day. This made it hard for the mages. Their magic was very precious. How could they use it so casually? Lords of very high status occasionally used this method to train their soldiers, but it was almost unheard of in the whole legion. The mages complained incessantly after a few days. They went to Lord George to complain. It was not a real battle. How could they, the noble mages, be allowed to consume magic for the civilian warriors? George did not say anything at first. Later, seeing that there were too many complaining mages, he made a stunning decision. The supreme mage came to the training ground with his staff in hand. For 4 days in a row, he led 4 different teams of mages to cast magic and train the soldiers. Even Lord George did this himself. The other mages did not dare to complain openly. At this time, George said publicly, "Our legion lacked training before. If we encounter a real war, it is likely that we will not be able to hold our ground. Once the warriors on the front line collapse in a war, as mages, you will not have a good end. Training the soldiers is also to protect yourself. The war has not even started, and you are already complaining. What will you do if you really go to the battlefield?" Lord George's words were very beautiful, and the subordinates of the mages did not dare to refute him. But Amon's approach was really unconventional. They had never heard of a commander who would let the accompanying mages waste magic needlessly, and on the march every day. Amon, a student of Nietzsche, had never had the concept of using magic as taught in the shrine. He would cast magic at any time, even to shelter from the rain and sun. He had long been accustomed to it. He did not think it was a big deal to let the mages do this. The mages did not know that their superior, Lord George, was also a sorcerer in his early years and was a friend of crazy old Nietzsche. He more or less knew the details of Amon. This time, it could be said that he was cooperating with Amon. But Amon would not let people waste their efforts for nothing. He gave George a precious staff. Although as the high priest of the Temple of Isis, George did not lack good staffs, it was also a good thing to keep in hand or reward his students and subordinates. Amon had obtained 3 staffs in the mysterious big cave. One was Nero's relic, which had been returned, another was given to Link, and the last one was finally given to George. In addition, Amon gave each of the mages a large number of parangons, which was a stunning generosity. When there were rewards, there were punishments. Although the priests didn't dare to complain anymore, they could still be lazy and play tricks. However, Amon didn't give them any face. He didn't care about the noble status of these priests. He once ordered Hardadef to drag out 2 priests who didn't work hard and beat them half to death in front of everyone. From then on, everything went on the right track. Of course, mages were of noble birth. These mages might come from noble families, or they might be relatives of some ministers of the empire. But now, they had to bow their heads for the time being. Even if they had complaints about the head of the legion, they could only wait until the war was over. In this way, Amon marched and trained his troops, advancing steadily along the coastline. 2 months later, when the legion entered the territory of the Cape States and was close to the border, he finally ordered the troops to stop drilling. All officers and soldiers only needed to rest. According to the battle plan, Amon could not advance alone, nor could he fall behind. He had to follow the main force along the northern coastline according to the speed of the main force. There were scouts passing messages between the NRA Legion and the main army. If it came to a critical juncture, there would be mages using flying vessels to send messages directly to the NRA Legion. The NRA Legion finally left the border and turned north. In front of them was the desolate Saya Desert. The winding coastline divided the blue sea and the pale yellow sand. Waves and dunes spread out as far as the eye could see. The sky was blue, with clusters of white clouds floating in the sky, as if the gods in the sky were herding their flocks. The scenery was so beautiful, but the wilderness was so desolate. In this tranquility, a war was about to break out in the distant desert. After leaving the border, Amon's army marched even more cautiously. He sent mages to take turns to use detection magic to keep an eye on the surroundings. The supply fleet also tailed far behind, no longer getting too close. At this moment, the scout reported an unexpected situation. The Horus Legion, led by Pharaoh himself, did not advance steadily according to the original battle plan. Instead, they suddenly accelerated and rushed to the center of the Saya Desert. The Legion of Set, which was originally stationed at the border, had to change their plan. They covered the civilians and supplies as they entered the desert to follow Pharaoh. According to the original plan, the Legion of Isis and the Horus Legion were supposed to advance side by side. The Legion of Isis was dozens of miles behind, but Pharaoh did not wait at the border. The Horus Legion suddenly accelerated and left the Legion of Isis behind. The Legion of Isis was afraid that something would go wrong. They left the large supplies in the Cape States and accelerated into the Saya Desert with light supplies. This was not in line with the original plan made by Igut's army. The whole strategic situation had changed from a steady advance to a sudden attack. Although the situation on the battlefield was ever-changing and the commander had to make all kinds of last-minute decisions, the general commander had neither the courage nor the authority to make such a big change before the battle had even started. After all, marching according to the plan was meritorious. Even if the battle was not going well, it was still the overall commander's responsibility. However, if the main force launched a surprise attack without authorization, all the cooperating troops had to make corresponding adjustments. Only the commander of the Horus Legion dared to do this because he was the supreme pharaoh. When the Horus Legion launched a surprise attack, they did not give the NRA Legion an order to cooperate. This made Amon a little confused. He did not know if he should advance according to the original plan or follow Pharaoh. After a few days, he received a message from scouts sent by Rod Dick, the commander of the Legion of Set, requesting the NRA Legion to speed up and cover the flank of the main battlefield. Not mentioning Amon's doubts, Rod Dick, who led the Legion of Set and was responsible for the logistics of the army, was also suffering. He had tried to persuade His Majesty Pharaoh not to change the plan and advance rashly, but Lazith too did not listen at all. In Rod Dick's view, the national strength of Igut was obviously stronger than Hittite. The Legion's combat strength and equipment also had a great advantage. Advancing steadily was the safest choice. Moreover, this time it was His Majesty Pharaoh who was leading the army in person. There was no room for any mistakes. The only obstacle to conquering Hittite was the huge logistical cost of crossing the Saya Desert. However, there was an accident that disrupted the original battle plan and changed Pharaoh's decision. According to the intelligence report before the war, this time, King Lusir of the Hittite kingdom also led the most elite Enlil Legion into the battlefield. Lucier did not intend to go to the battlefield himself, but the royal nobles, the ministers, and the elders of the Academy of Magic all requested the king to lead the army in person, just like the pharaohs of Igut, even if it was just a symbol. The army of the Empire of Igut was coming fiercely, and the Hittite kingdom had been planning for this war for many years. It was the moment when they needed to unleash their greatest strength in silence. The enemy's Lazith too had already gone to the front line. If King Lucier still hid in the capital, it would give the impression that he was timid and lacked confidence. The king leading the most elite legion in the kingdom was the best way to boost the morale of the army. The meaning of this war for the Hittite kingdom and the Empire of Igut was different. If the Empire of Igut lost, it was nothing more than the loss of a vassal state. But if the Hittite kingdom lost, it would be a turning point for the whole country. At the very least, it would lose a large area of territory, pay heavy tribute, and completely submit to the rule of the Empire of Igut. It would take a long time for it to recover its strength. Although King Lucier was reluctant, he still led the army in person. Saya, which had seemed peaceful over the years, suddenly gathered a well-trained and well-equipped elite legion. It was the Legion of Anu that was originally stationed on the western border. Goliath, as a supreme mage, became the head of the legion. The chief priest of the legion was his disciple Walter, the commander of the front was the supreme warrior Mun, and the chief logistics officer was the governor Shmuel. Another army of Nanner, which was originally stationed on the southern coast, also advanced along the coastline towards the Saya Desert. The Hittite kingdom was well prepared for the war and marched quickly. 3 legions had been assembled in the northern desert area south of the charcoal forest and west of the inland lake. The above was the last news sent back by the spy sent to the Hittite kingdom. It was difficult to cross hundreds of miles of desert without being discovered by the enemy. The latest movements of the enemy were not known through their own channels for the time being. The scouts sent by the Horus Legion went deep into the desert and caught several groups of people in different places. Some were passing caravans, some were fishermen by the seaside, and some claimed to be robbers. Their appearance in this place at this time was naturally very suspicious, so they were all treated as enemy spies. Under torture, they all confessed that they were spies of the Hittite kingdom. All the spies mentioned the same information in their confessions. King Lucier had led the Enlil Legion into battle and had advanced to the southern shore of the inland lake on the grassland bordering the desert. They were building a permanent camp. The Legion of Anu led by Goliath was stationed in the southern part of Saya, mobilizing combat supplies and building fortifications. They were 200 miles away from the Enlil Legion of the king. Another army of Nanner was stationed near the coastline, 200 miles away from the Legion of Anu. The 3 legions were distributed in an inverted triangle and coordinated with each other, waiting for the Igut army to enter the ambush circle. According to the original battle plan of the Empire of Igut, the main attack route of the Pharaoh army was to directly attack the pass in the southern part of Saya. They would be stopped by the Legion of Anu led by Goliath. The other 2 legions of the Hittite army might suddenly attack from the left and right. Even if they could not cut off the supply line of the Igut army, they could still delay the main force of the Igut army. In this way, the Igut army would have to fight a costly war of attrition on the other side of the desert far away from their homeland. If there was only one person who said this, it might be a trap. However, the spies caught in different locations revealed similar information after interrogation. It seemed that the possibility was very high. His Majesty Pharaoh was very angry at first. He even suspected that there was a traitor among the senior military officials of the Igut army who provided the top-secret battle plan to the Hittite army, allowing them to make targeted arrangements. The frontline commander of the Horus Legion, General Vadis, the Oracle, and the High Priest of the imperial capital, Ricard, all advised Pharaoh to calm down. According to a normal strategic situation, as long as someone who understood military affairs did a little analysis, they would be able to determine the main attack route of the Igut army. The battle plan formulated by the Egyptian Military Council was nothing out of the ordinary. It was just a well-behaved and steady plan. The Hittite kingdom had been preparing for war for a long time. It was completely normal for them to come up with such a response plan. They would rely on the border to carry out defensive operations and occupy the advantage of logistical supplies and troop replenishment. The Igut army only needed to attack the southern pass of Saya according to the original plan. The main force would fight the Legion of Anu led by Goliath head-on. At the same time, a part of the Legion of Isis and a large part of the Legion of Set would cut off the connection between the Legion of Anu and the Enlil Legion. This would prevent the Enlil Legion from returning. As for the army of Nannar stationed on the coastline, they could let the Nra Legion led by Amon take advantage of the opportunity to march north to confront them. They did not expect Amon to win. As long as the army of Nannar could be restrained near the coastline and could not attack the Igut army with the main force, it would be considered a success. Chapter 125. The opponent's 3 legions were distributed in an inverted triangle. In theory, the weak points were the 2 flanks. Pharaoh could not count on the Nra Legion to break through the army of Nannar in the southern border of the Hittite kingdom. As long as they could form a strategic restraint, Amon would have completed his task. Then the Enlil Legion led by King Lucier would be the most suitable target. There were 2 main reasons why Pharaoh decided to raid the Enlil Legion. First, the main purpose of this expedition was to establish a strategic stronghold along the inland lake where there were water sources and pastures. If the Hittite kingdom was one step ahead, it would be very passive in the future. It was necessary to remove this nail before the Enlil Legion could gain a firm foothold. Second, the king of the opponent was also there. As the saying goes, to capture the followers, one must first capture the king. If the Enlil Legion could be broken up, it would severely damage the morale of the entire Hittite kingdom. There might even be no need to fight the next battle. Third, was also very important, because of the water source. According to the distribution of the 3 legions of the Hittite kingdom, the places with water sources were blocked behind the front line. There was no water in the desert. The fresh water needed must be transported hundreds of miles from the south to the front line. If the front line of defense could not be breached in a short time, the transportation of fresh water alone would become a heavy logistical burden for the Igut army. Attacking the inland lake and taking the lead in seizing the places with water sources to build camps for the army. The grassland beside the lake could also be grazed, which would greatly reverse the logistical disadvantage. Now that the Enlil Legion was establishing a permanent stronghold, taking this opportunity to launch a surprise attack was the best strategic choice. Lazith II's analysis made even himself admire his wisdom, and his subordinates could not refute it. To be on the safe side, the Horus Legion also sent a group of mages to investigate the enemy by flying artifacts. Even the chief priest, the 9th-level supreme mage Ricard, was personally dispatched. After all, it was to explore the way for Pharaoh. If there was reconnaissance, there would be counter-reconnaissance. In the sky above the northern end of the desert, there were several unknown battles between mages. Several mages died with their flying artifacts, but some managed to return. High Priest Ricard flew high up in the sky to observe the enemy's camp. He successfully shook off the other party's pursuit and found out the arrangement of the Hittite kingdom's battle formation. It was exactly the same as the spy's confession. At that time, the Horus Legion was 700 miles away from the Enlil Legion, with the Saya Desert between them. Pharaoh immediately gave the order to attack at full speed. Behind them, there was still the half of the Legion of Set responsible for logistics and supplies, and the entire elite Legion of Isis. With the power of 2.5 elite legions, Lazith II was already waiting for victory to beckon to him. Amon received 3 consecutive intelligence reports during the march. The first one was from Rod Dick, asking him to cooperate with the Pharaoh army to speed up its advance. The second one was an official order from Pharaoh's frontline headquarters. The content was very detailed, asking Amon to order the logistics fleet to stay away from the enemy's navy to prevent a sneak attack, and to set up a camp on the shore. At this time, the Nra Legion was less than 200 miles away from the enemy's army of Nannar, and was already in a position to launch an attack. However, the frontline headquarters ordered Amon not to take the initiative to attack, but to monitor and contain the enemy. If the enemy launched an attack, they must rely on the camp to firmly defend. If they found that the enemy left the coastline to the east to outflank the Pharaoh army, they must take the opportunity to attack the logistic supply line and contain the main force of the army of Nanner in place. After receiving the order, Aman did not delay. He immediately ordered the supplies to go ashore and set up a camp. A temporary dock was set up on the coast behind the camp, and a group of elite soldiers were sent to escort the ships to ensure that the sea route in the rear would not be interrupted. With the current reserves of food and fresh water, even without the fleet, the Nra Legion would be able to last for more than a month. Aman sent scouts to monitor the movements of the army of Nanner, but found that the enemy did not move. Like him, the enemy had set up a port and camp, and built fortifications along the border. If Aman wanted to attack by force, it was almost impossible for him to win, because he was not only facing a legion, but also the city behind the legion. The war in the desert should have already started. In the area close to the main battlefield, scouts and spies had long lost their space to move. They could only rely on flying mages to communicate. Occasionally, they could use the detection devices operated by supreme mages to investigate the enemy camp, but it was difficult to find out the exact details of the movements in the enemy camp. Aman felt that he was left on the battlefield, and he could only wait for the outcome of the final battle. Although there was no official battle, the atmosphere in the camp was already very solemn. The mages and soldiers were on duty day and night, in the most tense state of alert. About 10 days later, an accident finally happened. At that time, Aman was sitting in the big tent playing chess with Metatro. Suddenly, he frowned and sensed a faintly discernible fluctuation of magic power approaching from afar. He immediately rushed out of the big tent. The Supreme Mage George was also alarmed. He had already flown into the air with his staff in hand. The team of mages set up a magic formation, and the soldiers boarded the semicircular defensive wall formed by chariots with their weapons in hand. The archers were ready to shoot at any time, and the javelins were also holding their spears in a battle formation. A black dot appeared in the eastern sky, and it was rapidly approaching. Aman had good eyesight and could see that it was a flying magic device, the wind shuttle. The two people on the shuttle looked exhausted. The man in front waved his staff again and again. He had already seen Aman's camp, and he gathered the last of his spirit and sped up. The man in the back, covered in blood, drew his bow and knocked an arrow towards the taboo behind. George had already received a message from the man on the shuttle. He shouted, "This is the Supreme Mage Cezanne of the Horus Legion. There are pursuers behind him, let's cover him." Then with a chant, the mages on the ground formed a formation and raised their staffs. Smoke and dust rose from the desert, and the flying sand was rolled into the sky, forming a curtain wall that covered the sky. The curtain wall trembled and buzzed. The wind shuttle passed through the curtain wall without being affected and was directly let in. In the distance, a few more black dots appeared in the sky. They were the pursuers who were following behind. In theory, only 8th-level Supreme Mages could fly freely without the help of an artifact, but if they had a precious flying magic device, a high-level 6th-level mage could also fly in the sky. In short, the strength of the pursuers must not be weak. The shuttle landed in the barracks and lost control, plowing a deep trench in the sand. The Supreme Mage Cezanne, who was driving the shuttle, retracted his magic, and the shuttle turned into a palm-sized artifact. He and the warrior behind him were both thrown out and fell to the ground unconscious. Soldiers had already rushed up to them and carried them to the big tent for treatment. Cezanne had already entered the safe zone. The flying sand curtain wall that protected the barracks was swept away by the wind. The shock of the sand shot into the air like countless arrowheads, like a burst of yellow smoke, blocking the pursuers flying in the distance. The mages were ready to fight, and the soldiers also raised their bows and arrows, waiting for the enemy to come into range. At this moment, there was a sound of a bowstring, and a silver light slanted into the sky, hitting a flying shuttle that was chasing after them. There was a sound of an explosion in the air, and a distorted shadow swelled. The magic device had lost control and turned into a palm-sized artifact. 2 people fell from the sky and smashed heavily on the sand dunes outside the barracks, motionless. Commander Amon was already standing on top of a chariot, holding the magic bow made from the tusks and tendons of the two-headed serpent in his hand. What he shot was not a poisonous arrow made from the stinger of a scorpion, but a heavy arrow forged from damask steel, plated with heavy silver, and engraved with magic patterns. This kind of arrow was specially prepared for supreme warriors who had undergone the second awakening of power. It required a special strong bow to be effective, and ordinary warriors would not be able to shoot it at all. The amazing power of this arrow, shot by Amon with the help of magic, was far greater and had a longer range than the arrows shot by ordinary supreme warriors. His magic arts were actually more advanced than his body arts. The magic power contained in the arrow had reached the limit that the magic array engraved on it could bear, and the bow in Amon's hand was much more magical than the strongest battle bow issued by the army. The pursuers in the air saw that Cézanne had fled into the barracks, and they could not fight against an entire legion. In the face of the counterattack of the magic array, they all flew high into the sky, ready to retreat as soon as they saw the enemy camp clearly. The flying shuttle that Amon shot down was a flying shuttle controlled by a 6th-level mage. The mage had originally flown very high, far away from the range of the long-range weapons in the barracks. He thought that he was safe, but when he turned in the air and was about to fly back, Amon's arrow had already arrived. No one had expected such an accurate and powerful arrow to be shot in such a short encounter. Even George, who was watching the battle from the main formation in the air, was amazed, and the soldiers burst into thunderous cheers. The pursuers in the air had already turned around and gone far away. They seemed to be frightened by the power of Amon's arrow and did not dare to stay in the air for a moment. The enemy's situation was unclear, and George did not dare to rashly send mages to chase after them. Including the soldiers, servants, laborers, and logistical teams, a total of more than 20,000 people, they had marched thousands of miles until now, and only one arrow had been shot in the official battle. This arrow was enough to establish Amon's position in the legion, and those who saw him shoot this arrow were all in awe. But Amon himself was very dissatisfied with this arrow. He thought back to the earth-shattering arrow he had seen shot by the mysterious assassin at the blessing ceremony. Now he used his best bow to shoot the heaviest magic arrow with all his strength, but the power was still far from comparable to that arrow, even though he was now a supreme warrior and a supreme sorcerer. But Amon was very satisfied with his own legion. Although it was only a small scene of 5 or 6 enemies flying over, it was the first time this legion had encountered a head-on battle. No one panicked, and even the archers did not shoot indiscriminately. The ranks of the mages and the soldiers were set up in the shortest time possible. Even if a large army attacked, they would be able to calmly resist. It seemed that after some training and consolidation, this miscellaneous legion had become a fighting force that could not be underestimated. Although it was still not comparable to the elite legions of the Empire, it was definitely not vulnerable. The pursuers retreated, and the 2 men who had fled into the camp were unconscious. George had already recognized the other man. He was the captain of His Majesty Pharaoh's personal guards, Vega, a 7th-level supreme warrior. The personnel of the Horus Legion was much better than that of the Inare Legion. A 7th-level supreme warrior like Vega was only a captain of Pharaoh's personal guards, while a 7th-level supreme mage like Cézanne was only a captain of the mages under Ricard. These 2 men had obviously broken through from the direction of the main battlefield. Did they encounter an emergency situation that forced Pharaoh to send them to the Inare Legion? Madanzo found a roll of documents on the unconscious Cézanne. As expected, it was an emergency order from Pharaoh. Amon and George were shocked after reading it. Igut's main army was not doing well on the northern edge of the desert. To be more precise, it had suffered a great defeat. The Legion of Set led by Rod Dik was scattered, while the Legion of Isis led by Ankh was divided into 2 parts. One part joined Pharaoh's Horus Legion, while the other part was also defeated. At present, Pharaoh was besieged by the Hittite army on the edge of the desert and was in a precarious situation. The Inare Legion was urgently ordered to leave the coastline and head east for reinforcements to cover Pharaoh's army's breakthrough. The order also specifically emphasized that they should bring enough supplies. After reading the order, Aman and George looked at each other for a long time. They did not express their opinions first, but asked John, who was sitting beside them, what did he think? The straightforward John slammed his fist on the table and shouted, "What kind of war is this? It's one thing to change the marching plan at a whim, but they left us at the seaside for more than 3 months, and when the main force is defeated and they need scapegoats, they think of us?" George advised in a low voice, "General John, now is not the time to vent your personal grievances. No matter how dissatisfied you are, you have to focus on the overall situation. In your opinion, how can we complete Pharaoh's order?" This question was very skillful. How could an order be completed? Under normal circumstances, it was only necessary to carry it out directly. However, Pharaoh's order to break camp and head east was tantamount to leaving the coastline and being separated from the rear supply fleet. In theory, they could station troops at the seaside, unload the goods from the temporary port, and use the fleet to organize logistics transportation. However, this would easily be cut off by the other party's army of Nanner, and they would become a lone army deep in the desert. If they were entangled by the other party in the desert, the entire army would be finished once they ran out of water, not to mention provisions. The army of Nanner did not even need to fight to the death, they only needed to exhaust them in the desert. Moreover, the overall combat power of the Nra Legion was not as good as the army of Nanner. Pharaoh's order was equivalent to sending this legion to their deaths. It was nothing more than to attract the Hittite kingdom's troops to cover the main force's breakthrough. Madanzo, who was standing beside Aman, frowned and said, "Pharaoh also ordered us to bring all the provisions on the spot. Since Rod-Dick's logistics legion was scattered in the desert, I think the provisions and arrows in Pharaoh's army must have been almost consumed. If we really do that, our marching speed will be very slow, and we will be easily surrounded in the desert. If we want to rescue Pharaoh, we should raid lightly, but that way we can only bring 6 days' worth of water at most, which is not in line with Pharaoh's requirements." George touched the bracelet on his wrist and added with a bitter smile, "If we use my spatial artifact to carry supplies with all our strength, we can carry at most 1 more day's worth of provisions and water for the Legion's combat troops." Aman asked again, "The mention of spatial artifacts reminds me that there must be more than one Supreme Mage in Pharaoh's army. There are 2 9th-level Supreme Mages in the 3 legions alone. In addition to Cezanne, who broke through the encirclement today to deliver the letter, there are another 6 Supreme Mages. They should also have more sophisticated spatial artifacts. How many military supplies can they carry?" George shook his head and said, "Part of the Legion of Set and the Legion of Isis have been scattered. Even if all the Supreme Mages are safe and sound and reunited with Pharaoh, their spatial artifacts are full of military supplies. I am afraid that they can only last for 10 days or half a month. Moreover, the spatial artifacts of Supreme Mages are usually used for other purposes. It is impossible to use them all to carry provisions and water. Logistics and military supplies are mainly transported by convoys." John touched the back of his head and said, "In your opinion, should we carry out Pharaoh's order?" George glared at him and said, "How can a military order not be carried out? But this order was not received by us, it was found from the unconscious Supreme Mage Cezanne, it still needs to be confirmed, we have to wake him up." Aman was silent for a long time, finally looked up and said, "Pharaoh's order is that he hopes the Nra Legion can help the main force out of danger. As long as we can find a way to complete this task, it will be considered as carrying out the order. There are 2 urgent matters at hand. One is to ask the chief priest George to hurry up and personally use healing magic to wake up the messenger. In addition, no matter what action the Legion carries out, we must clearly investigate the enemy's distribution. This also requires the help of the chief priest George. Fly me to the battlefield to see the enemy's arrangement." John and Madanzo said in unison, "Are you 2 going to fly to the battlefield to see the enemy's situation in person? This is too risky." Aman also smiled bitterly and said, "Risky? Is there anyone else in our legion who can carry out this task and have the confidence to return safely? At least Lord George and I can escape if we encounter an accident, but if the army acts rashly and falls into a tight encirclement, we won't even be able to escape." After the emergency treatment of the priests, the 2 messengers were out of danger. At midnight, the supreme warrior Vega was the first to wake up and struggled to tell what had happened in the desert. Pharaoh led the Horus Legion forward without any obstacles along the way, smoothly crossing 700 miles of the desert, and was about to launch a sudden attack on the Enlil Legion when the Legion of Set, which was responsible for logistics, was ambushed. The ambushers had obviously undergone special targeted training. The soldiers were hidden under the sand in cloaks and did not encounter the Horus Legion, but at night, they inexplicably emerged from the desert on both sides, catching Rod-Dik off guard. Chapter 126. Pharaoh was furious and ordered the rear of the Horus Legion to return to support. At the same time, he ordered the Legion of Isis to surround and destroy the enemy ambushing in the desert. At this moment, the Hittite Legion took the initiative to attack from the north. King Lucier was not in the army, and the commander was actually Goliath. Not only was the Enlil Legion here, but also the Legion of Anu led by Goliath. The ambush on the Legion of Set in the desert was the masterpiece of a surprise attack team specially trained by the Legion of Anu. Pharaoh made mistakes in both the command and the judgment of intelligence. He thought that he would use the strength of 2.5 legions to attack one of the enemy's legions. As a result, when the real battle began, he found that the other side had 2 elite legions to attack, and only the Horus Legion beside him could enter the battle first. The Legion of Isis behind was still gathering the scattered Legion of Set and sorting out the remaining supplies. The combat power of the Horus Legion was very strong, but they trekked across the desert to carry out a surprise attack, while the other 2 legions were waiting at ease. This battle lasted for 3 days and 3 nights at the junction of the desert and grassland. The Horus Legion's continuous charge did not break through the opponent's line of defense, and the countercharge commanded by Goliath finally broke through the Horus Legion's battle formation. In the first battle, Pharaoh was defeated. The Horus Legion had to retreat and regroup, but Goliath would not give Pharaoh a chance. He commanded the 2 legions to outflank the Horus Legion from the left and right in an attempt to wipe out the Horus Legion. At this time, the situation of the battle had been reversed. The Horus Legion was exhausted, and it was difficult for them to fight again. Fortunately, the Legion of Isis arrived in time and launched an encounter with the Hittite army who was about to form an encirclement. This was a chaotic battle. It had only lasted for a day and a night, but the scene was extremely tragic. Both sides had more casualties than the previous battle. From the looks of it, they were evenly matched. The Igut army was only at a slight disadvantage and barely managed to stabilize their position. However, the Legion of Isis that lagged behind were defeated by the outflanking Hittite army. When the ambush failed and they entered the battlefield, Pharaoh's army fell into a predicament. They only managed to gather an exhausted division of more than 1 legion. Facing 2 elite legions of Hittite that were full of fighting spirit, they were in a dilemma. If they continued to advance, they would not be able to defeat Hittite's army. If they retreated, they would lose most of their supplies. It would be difficult for them to lead the army safely across the Saya Desert. The Hittite army did not form a tight encirclement. They only guarded the water source outside the desert and constantly launched harassment charges to deplete the strength of Pharaoh's army. They seemed to be waiting for Pharaoh's army to retreat. Once this exhausted division turned around and retreated into the desert, morale would be low and there would be a shortage of food and water. The Hittite army would attack from behind. The Igut army would definitely collapse or even be completely annihilated. The Igut army did not sit still and wait for death. With no way out, they launched a desperate attack. They pushed forward and occupied a place with a water source, obtaining fresh water supplies. At that time, the Hittite army strategically retreated to create a gap. When the Igut army had just set up camp, they launched a counterattack from 3 sides, forcing the Igut army to retreat to a corner of the desert. After a few rounds of this, the Igut army suffered heavy losses and was exhausted. They could no longer launch an active attack. They could only stay in their camp and wait for reinforcements. Reinforcements could come from 2 directions. The first was the reinforcements of the Igut army. After half of the Legion of Seat was broken up, Julian had already escorted Rod Dick back to the Cape States. On the one hand, she gathered the remaining troops, and on the other hand, she organized the officers and soldiers who stayed in the city and the emergency conscription of the reserve army, preparing to rescue and reinforce the main army. However, distant water could not quench the present thirst. The situation of the IGUT army was already very critical. The frontline command suggested that Pharaoh break out of the encirclement alone under the protection of the supreme mages. But this would be a complete defeat, and the glory of Pharaoh would also be greatly damaged. The army in the desert would face the result of total annihilation. Lazith too was unwilling to accept this. The closest reinforcements to the main battlefield were the Inare Legion, which had not yet entered the battle and had a complete lineup. Pharaoh ordered the Inare Legion to go east as reinforcements, even if it was only to attract the enemy's forces to cover the retreat of the main army or buy time. It was not easy to send this order across more than 300 miles of desert. The road on the ground had long been cut off by the Hittite army, so they could only send the mages. Pharaoh sent a total of 5 shuttles. The first 4 were all cover to attract the enemy's intercepting firepower. The shuttle led by the Supreme Mage Cezanne and the Supreme Warrior Vega was the real main force to break out of the encirclement. The two did not disappoint Pharaoh's great trust. They finally broke through the heavy obstruction and brought the order to the Inare Legion. The awakened Supreme Warrior Vega finished telling the story. Amon and George both comforted him to rest well and said that the Inare Legion would do its best to rescue Pharaoh from danger. Vega fell into a deep slumber again. Apart from his serious injuries, it was also because of Ida's divine incantation that he fell into a deep slumber again. Cezanne's body was obviously not as strong as that of the Supreme Warrior, and he had not woken up yet. Coming out of the tent, Amon and George went to a secluded place to discuss in secret. Amon said, "There's no time to lose. If you want to fly and scout the camp, I suggest you take advantage of the night to act and find out the enemy's situation before making a decision." George shook his head and said, "Look at the sky full of stars, the vigilant Supreme Mage can see more clearly, and the vigilance at night will be higher. In fact, it will be easier to expose the target. The operation of a large legion can't be carried out at will. If you order us to prepare for the march now, it won't be too late for us to wait for half a day. During the day, when the sun is high in the sky, the sunlight on the desert is dazzling, which will interfere with the observation and detection of magic. It is more suitable for flying and scouting. It would be better if there are clouds at low altitude." Amon asked again, "How many flying artifacts are distributed in total?" George sighed and said, "The Wind Shuttle is the standard flying artifact on the continent. It is very fast and the production method is relatively mature, but the cost of building it is too high. The Inare Legion has 5, all of which are the property of the Empire, not the personal artifacts of the mages." Amon thought for a moment and said, "In fact, we have 7 flying artifacts now. Cezanne brought 1, and I shot down 1 during the day." George smiled bitterly and said, "Of course, Cezanne's shuttle will be returned to him later, but we can use it temporarily. The shuttle you shot down is the Legion head's personal trophy, you can keep it for yourself. It doesn't violate any rules of the Empire. In fact, it's useless to have more. Including me, we only have 5 mages who can operate the shuttle. The number of masters we have is far less than the number of Horus or the Legion of Isis." George still missed 2 people. Both Amon and Madanzo could operate the Wind Shuttle, but the others didn't know about it. Amon shot down 2 people with 1 arrow during the day. They weren't killed by arrows, but fell to their deaths from a high altitude. At that time, an enemy mage and a warrior were operating the Wind Shuttle in pursuit of Cezanne, and Amon shot them into the shuttle. The enemy warrior couldn't stop the arrow at all, and the pilot was a 6th-level mage. He tried to use the spatial power of the shuttle to defend himself. But the impact of the arrow was so great that it even carried a continuous burst of energy, like a tidal wave. The strange tremor impact was even stronger than the force of the arrow. The mage was caught off guard and lost control of the shuttle. As a result, he fell from the sky together with the warrior. Of course, their staffs, weapons, and even the shuttle became Amon's trophies. The shuttle was a little damaged, but it was easily repaired in Amon's hands. It was much easier than collecting materials to build a new one. It was also an unexpected gain. Amon didn't elaborate on this. He thought for a moment and said to George, "Can you give me another shuttle for the time being? It may be useful in case of emergencies." Even if a supreme warrior had gone through the second awakening of his power, it was still difficult for him to master the most esoteric flight magic of the high-order spatial magic and air magic, not to mention using both at the same time. It was almost impossible for him to operate the wind shuttle. But George didn't even ask about it and gave Amon a wind shuttle. Amon returned to his commander's tent with the two shuttles. Madanzo was still guarding outside the tent with his guards. Amon asked, "Is my cat back?" Madanzo replied, "Lord Schrödinger just came back and went straight into the back tent." Amon actually took a cat with him on the march, and this cat's food and drink were personally served by the head of the Legion every day. It was resting in Amon's tent. Schrödinger was very arrogant, which showed how much Amon doted on it. The guards jokingly called the cat Lord Schrödinger, which was also a kind of flattery. Over time, the joke became a habit, and even Madanzo called it that way. During the day, when the accident happened, Schrödinger slipped out and disappeared. Amon had urgent matters to deal with and didn't have time to deal with it. Now that he learned that Schrödinger had returned, he was relieved. He walked into the tent and saw Schrödinger squatting in the seat of the Legion commander in the middle of the tent. He just smiled, then took out the utensils like a magic trick and made a pot of fragrant broth for Schrödinger, because Schrödinger hadn't eaten since the day. Schrödinger sat in the seat of the commander and finished the food in an ostentatious manner. It stretched out its paw and scratched the table in front of it twice, then meowed a few times at Amon. Amon had been with this cat for many years. Even if Schrödinger couldn't speak, he could probably guess what it wanted to do just by looking at its expression and movements. He immediately brought a large plate covered with fine sand and placed it in front of Schrödinger. He said, "You went out for a while. Did you find something? Do you have something to tell me?" A cat's sharp claws were usually retracted in the meat pad, and would only be stretched out when catching mice and the like. But Schrödinger's claws were very interesting. It could retract the other claws and only stick out the tip of one of its claws, just like a person sticking out a finger and starting to draw on a sand table. First, it drew a semicircle along the edge of the sand table with 5 points in it. Then, it drew a line on the other side with the words, "Army of Nanner," written on it. Then, it drew a line in the distance with the words, "Ambush," written on it. Amon had already understood that this was the distribution map of the battle lines of all sides on the battlefield. Schrödinger was clearly reminding him that the Hittite army had long expected that the Inare legion would go to reinforce the pharaoh, and had set up an ambush in the desert, waiting for him to go over. As long as the Inare legion went deep into the desert and was tired from marching with heavy supplies, they would be ambushed by the Enlil legion and the legion of Anu in the most unfavorable terrain. The army of Nanner would also take the opportunity to cut off the supply line and outflank them from the back. There was no need to fight a tough battle, they just needed to trap them to death. Schrödinger's claws did not stop. He drew a frame behind the line of defense of the army of Nanner, near the southern part of the charcoal marsh, and wrote, "King of Hittite," inside. Amon, who was sitting opposite, could not help but stand up and exclaim in a low voice, "Schrödinger, what did you say that the king of Hittite is in this position?" Schrödinger nodded like a cat, then stretched out his claws and erased all the traces on the sand table. This information was too important to make Amon reconsider and adjust the overall battle plan. Pharaoh was fooled. He thought that the king of Hittite was stationed with the Enlil legion on the south bank of the inland lake. In fact, the Enlil legion was indeed there, but the king Lusir himself was in the rear, and Goliath had also quietly gathered there with the main force of the legion of Anu. How did Goliath accomplish all this without Igut's detection? In addition to sending different spies to spread false information and blocking the border to prevent scouts from discovering it, there should be other means. For example, he could order soldiers to disguise themselves as servants or peasants, mix them into the logistics team that transported supplies or built strongholds, and then transport them bit by bit, and then complete the assembly. As long as the route of the main force of Igut had been determined, the decisive battlefield had been decided. The Hittite army did not change the arrangement of the legion on the surface, and even deceived the supreme mage's flying reconnaissance. Seeing the map drawn by Schrödinger, especially pointing out the location of the king of Hittite, a plan gradually emerged in Amon's mind. Because this plan was too risky and bold, he still had to carefully consider all the details, and tomorrow he would investigate in person. Shortly after sunrise the next morning, the sun on the desert was already very strong, and the light white sand reflected very dazzling white light. Amon ordered Madanzo and John to strengthen the defense, and quietly left the camp with the chief priest George. Behind a hidden sand dune in the distance, after making sure that there was no one nearby, George took out a magic item and said, "Commander, let's go." Amon was slightly startled, and said in a low voice, "Crystal shuttle? Lord George actually has such a good thing." George replied with a slight sigh, "Lord Amon really has a good eye, to be able to recognize the crystal shuttle at a glance. You must be an expert in all kinds of magic items, right? Many years ago, an old friend taught me how to make this, but unfortunately I had neither the ability nor the financial resources at that time. Later, I was fortunate enough to become an honorary high priest of the Temple of Isis, and later became an official high priest, so I had enough financial resources and energy to make such a magic item, which I succeeded not long ago. It is my precious private collection, and also a memento of the past." The thing in George's hand was like a small translucent plate, with a ventusum in the middle and 3 aquaticors symmetrically on the edges. The parangons and the magic item seemed to be naturally connected, and no one knew what kind of magical method was used to make it. Just the materials used to make such an item were already astoundingly expensive, not to mention how many times it had to be damaged before it could be made. One could only imagine how precious it was. George steered the crystal shuttle and quietly rose into the sky with Amon. From a close distance, the space transformed by the crystal shuttle looked like a hazy, translucent reflection of light and shadow, and from a distance, it was impossible to see any trace of it at all. When it flew high into the sky, the crystal shuttle became even more invisible, and when it encountered clouds, it could also be revealed like a gray or white mist, like a cloud floating in the sky. After flying high into the sky, the crystal shuttle turned into a misty cloud, which was more magical than the translucent state of light and shadow. George then said to Amon, "The crystal shuttle also has a stealth effect, which can avoid the detection of detection magic. If we keep a safe distance, even a supreme mage will not be able to find us. If I didn't have this thing in my hand, I wouldn't have dared to take Lord Amon to explore the camp." Amon nodded and said, "I've heard of this kind of flying magic item, but it's too difficult to make. This is the first time I've seen someone successfully make it. Although its stealth effect is good, the people on it can't easily use magic to attack the outside, otherwise it will lose the purpose of stealth. It also has a weakness, that is, its speed is much slower than the wind shuttle." George held his staff in one hand and took out a wind shuttle with the other. He said, "It doesn't matter, we'll just scout high in the sky and try not to be discovered. If we are discovered, the two of us can't fight the army no matter how capable we are. Let's put away the crystal shuttle and escape with the wind shuttle. When the time comes, Supreme Warrior Amon, don't forget to cover our escape with magic arrows." The two talked as they headed east. Although the speed of the crystal shuttle was not as fast as the wind shuttle, as a flying magic item, it was certainly not slow. By noon, they had already flown across the desert and approached the main battlefield, seeing the camps of the two armies in the distance. Pharaoh's army was stationed at the edge of the desert, only a few dozen miles away from the nearest water source. Obviously, more than one battle had broken out between the camp and the water source. Broken weapons could be seen scattered on the ground, reflecting the sun. The Hittite army's banners were neat and tidy, in a state of encirclement on 3 sides, and on both sides of the desert to the south where Pharaoh might have retreated, they had arranged patrol teams along the way. Schrödinger was right. There was a heavy line of defense on the road to meet the Inare Legion, waiting for Ammon to walk into the trap. At present, Pharaoh's army was unable to attack and could only defend passively. The Hittite army could calmly deploy their elites to meet the Inare Legion. It was too high up in the sky to see all the details, and there might be other ambushes on both sides of the desert. Rod Dick had suffered such a loss before. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.